When Ryan Hale chose to help a stranded stranger instead of making his life-changing job interview, he thought he'd just thrown away his family's last chance at survival. The bills were piling up, his son's shoes had holes, and that interview was supposed to be their way out. But as he stood in the pouring rain, pulling a luxury sedan from the mud, he had no idea the woman behind that wheel was watching him far more carefully than any interviewer ever would. Sometimes the biggest opportunities don't come from the choices we plan. They come from who we are when everything is on the line. If you're invested in stories about character, redemption, and the moments that define us, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The rain didn't just fall, it attacked. It hammered against Ryan Hale's windshield with the kind of fury that made the wipers useless, turning the road ahead into a blur of gray and darker gray. The old pickup's defroster wheezed pathetically, fogging the glass faster than Ryan could wipe it clear with his sleeve. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had gone white, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice kept repeating the same desperate mantra, "Don't be late, don't be late, don't be late." The clock on the dashboard read 2:47 p.m. The interview was at 3:00. Crossline Systems headquarters was still 8 minutes away, 7 if he pushed it, which he was absolutely going to do. Ryan pressed harder on the accelerator, feeling the truck shudder beneath him like it was held together by prayers and rust, which, frankly, wasn't far from the truth. His phone buzzed in the cup holder, and Ryan didn't need to look to know what it was. Another reminder. Interview with Crossline Systems, 3:00 p.m. 1247 Commerce Drive. As if he could forget. As if he'd thought about anything else for the past 72 hours. This wasn't just an interview. This was the interview. The one that could change everything. The one that could finally pull him and Jake out of the hole they'd been living in since Sarah died. Ryan's jaw tightened at the thought of his son. 8 years old and already too familiar with the phrase, "We can't afford that." Too used to wearing shoes until they literally fell apart. Too accustomed to the look on his father's face when the bills came in and the bank account stayed empty. The logistics coordinator position at Crossline Systems paid $85,000 a year. $85,000. Ryan had stared at that number on the job posting until his eyes burned. It was more than double what he made now at the warehouse. It was health insurance. It was stability. It was Jake not having to pack the same peanut butter sandwich for lunch every single day because it was all they could afford. It was everything. The rain intensified, if that was even possible. Water rushed across the road in sheets, pooling in places where the asphalt had given up trying to drain it all. Ryan leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, his foot steady on the gas despite every instinct screaming at him to slow down. 2:48 p.m. "Come on," he muttered to the truck, to the rain, to the universe that seemed determined to make everything harder than it needed to be. "Just let me get there. Just this once. Let something go right." And that's when he saw her. At first, it was just a shape on the side of the road, a dark silhouette that didn't belong. Ryan almost missed it entirely, would have blown right past if a flash of lightning hadn't lit up the scene for just a second. A car. No, not just a car. A luxury sedan, the kind that cost more than Ryan made in 3 years, sunk hood deep in mud just off the shoulder. And standing next to it, barely visible through the downpour, was a woman. Ryan's foot eased off the gas before his brain fully processed what he was doing. No. The word was sharp in his mind, almost violent. No, you don't have time. You're already cutting it close. You cannot be late. But even as he thought it, the truck was already slowing. Ryan's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, then back to the woman. She was alone. Completely alone on a back road in the middle of what was rapidly becoming a serious flood situation. Her car was trapped, and from the way she was moving, pacing, gesturing, clearly agitated, she needed help. 2:49 p.m. The interview was 11 minutes away. If he stopped, he'd have to help her, get her car out, make sure she was safe. That would take at least 15, maybe 20 minutes. There was no scenario where stopping didn't make him late. Ryan's phone buzzed again, another reminder like the universe was testing him. His hands tightened on the wheel. The logical choice was obvious. Drive past. Someone else would come along. She probably had a phone, could call for help. She'd be fine. This interview was too important. Jake was too important. The woman stumbled in the mud, nearly fell, caught herself against the car. Damn it, Ryan breathed. He pulled over. The decision didn't feel noble or heroic. It felt expensive. It felt like watching his last chance slip through his fingers while he stood helpless to stop it. But Ryan's hands were already putting the truck in park, and he was already reaching for the door handle, and some part of him that was older than logic or self-preservation was already moving him forward. The rain hit him like a physical force the moment he stepped out. Within seconds, he was soaked through, his interview clothes, the only decent outfit he owned, plastered to his skin. The button-down shirt he'd ironed so carefully that morning was already ruined. The dress shoes he'd polished until they almost looked new were sinking into mud. None of it mattered now. "Hey," Ryan called out, jogging toward the woman. "Are you okay?" She spun toward him, and even through the rain, Ryan could see the frustration radiating off her like heat. She was probably in her mid-30s, dressed in what had once been an expensive business suit before the storm had gotten to it. Dark hair plastered to her face, mascara running, heels sunk so deep in mud they were basically useless. "Does it look like I'm okay?" She shot back, her voice sharp with panic and anger. "My car is stuck. I'm late for a meeting, and I can't get a signal to call anyone." Ryan moved past her to assess the situation. The sedan was trapped all right. Both front tires sunk deep into soft mud where the shoulder gave way to what was usually a drainage ditch, but was now more like a small river. The rear tires were barely touching solid ground. It was bad, but Ryan had dealt with worse. "How long have you been here?" he asked, already mentally cataloging what he'd need from his truck. 20 minutes. I tried to reverse out, but the tires just kept spinning. I've ruined a $2,000 suit, destroyed my shoes, and... She stopped abruptly, seeming to really see Ryan for the first time. Her eyes moved from his face to his soaked interview clothes to the battered pickup idling behind him. "Who are you?" "Someone who's probably making a huge mistake," Ryan muttered, but not loud enough for her to hear. Louder, he said, "Ryan Hale, I've got a winch on my truck. I can pull you out." "You can?" The relief in her voice was immediate and profound. "Oh, thank God. Yes, please. How much?" Ryan was already heading back to his truck. "How much what?" "How much do you charge?" "For the tow?" He paused with his hand on the truck bed, looked back at her. "I'm not a tow truck, and I don't charge people for helping." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion, like the concept of free assistance was foreign to her. "Well, I'll pay you anyway, obviously. Just please, get me out of here." Ryan didn't respond. He was too busy pulling out the tow strap and chain from the truck bed, muscle memory taking over. He'd done this dozens of times growing up, pulling friends out of ditches, helping neighbors stuck in snow or mud. The equipment was old but solid, well-maintained despite everything else in his life falling apart. 2:52 p.m. The time mocked him from his phone screen. He was going to be late. There was no way around it now. He'd made his choice the moment he pulled over, and there was no taking it back. Ryan secured the strap to his truck's rear hitch, then waded through ankle-deep mud to attach the other end to the sedan's front tow hook. The woman, he still didn't know her name, watched from a slightly drier patch of ground, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold rain. "What were you doing out here anyway?" Ryan called over the storm as he worked, checking the connections twice to make sure they'd hold. "This road doesn't exactly go anywhere important." "Shortcut," she said, and something in her tone made it sound like she was angry at herself. "My GPS said it would save 10 minutes. Clearly that was optimistic." Ryan almost laughed. Here they both were, destroyed by the desperate mathematics of saved time. He'd taken this back road for the same reason, to shave a few minutes off his route to cross-line systems. Now they were both paying the price. "Okay," he said, trudging back toward his truck, mud sucking at his ruined shoes with every step. "I'm going to pull forward slowly. If the strap breaks, get clear fast. These things can snap back like a whip if the tension releases wrong." She nodded, seeming to take the warning seriously, and moved to what passed for safety. Ryan climbed back into his truck, water dripping from every part of him, and put it in low gear. He eased forward, feeling the strap tighten, watching in his side mirror as the line went taut. The truck's engine growled, the tires fought for purchase on the slick road. For a long moment, nothing happened. The sedan stayed locked in the mud's grip, and Ryan's truck shuddered with effort. He pressed the accelerator a fraction more, and his own tires started to slip. "Come on," he whispered, the same prayer he'd been saying all day, for different reasons now. "Come on." And then, movement. Subtle at first, then more pronounced. The sedan's front end lifted slightly, tires pulling free of the mud suction with an obscene sucking sound. Ryan kept the pressure steady, not too fast or he'd risk losing traction himself, and inch by inch, foot by foot, he dragged the luxury car back onto solid road. When it was clear, Ryan stopped, put the truck in park, and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Through the rearview mirror, he could see the woman staring at her freed car like she couldn't quite believe it was real. 2:57 p.m. Ryan's stomach dropped. 3 minutes. He had 3 minutes to detach the strap, get back in his truck, and somehow make it to Crossline Systems. It was physically impossible. Even if he abandoned the woman right now, even if he drove like a maniac, he'd be at least 10 minutes late. The interview was gone. The realization hit him with surprising force, even though he'd known it was coming from the moment he pulled over. He'd traded $85,000 a year, health insurance, stability, and Jake's future for this, pulling a stranger's car out of the mud in the middle of a rainstorm. Ryan climbed out of the truck, his movements mechanical now, and disconnected the tow strap. The woman approached as he was coiling it back up, moving carefully in her destroyed heels. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, and she actually sounded genuine now, the earlier panic replaced by something softer. "Seriously, you're a lifesaver. Let me at least give you something for your time." She was reaching for her purse, which she'd apparently retrieved from her car, but Ryan held up a hand. "I don't want your money, but your clothes were already done for before I stopped." He managed something that might have been a smile, though it felt hollow. "Glad I could help. Drive safe." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Wait. At least tell me why. Why did you stop?" Ryan looked back at her, this well-dressed stranger whose crisis had just cost him everything, and tried to find an answer that made sense. The truth was, he didn't entirely know. Instinct? Stupid nobility? The same thing that made him pack Jake's lunch every morning, even when there wasn't quite enough for both of them? "Because you needed help," he said finally, "and I could give it." She studied him for a long moment, rain streaming down both their faces, and Ryan could see her mind working behind her eyes, processing, evaluating, filing away information. "What's your name again?" she asked. "Ryan Hale." "Where were you headed, Ryan Hale, when you stopped?" He almost didn't answer. What was the point? But something about the way she asked, with genuine curiosity rather than polite small talk, made him tell the truth. "Job interview at Crossline Systems." He glanced at his phone. 3:01 p.m. "Which I'm now officially late for." Her expression shifted, surprise, then something else Ryan couldn't quite read. "You stopped to help me even though—" "Yeah." He cut her off, suddenly tired, suddenly feeling every bit of the mistake he'd just made. "I did. So if we're done here, I need to go see if there's any chance of salvaging this." He didn't wait for her response. Ryan climbed back into his truck, tossed the tow strap in the passenger seat, and pulled back onto the road. In his rearview mirror, he watched the woman standing in the rain, watching him drive away. Then he focused forward, gripped the wheel, and drove. The rain was letting up by the time Ryan pulled into the parking lot of Crossline Systems headquarters. Not that it mattered. He was 16 minutes late, looked like he'd swum there, and smelled like wet dog and mud. His interview clothes were destroyed, caked with mud up to the knees, the shirt wrinkled and stained. His hair was plastered to his head, and when he caught sight of himself in the rearview mirror, he looked exactly like what he was, a desperate man who just made an incredibly stupid choice. But he'd come this far. He had to at least try. The Crossline Systems building was impressive, all glass and steel, the kind of corporate monument that screams success and money. Ryan's muddy shoes left tracks across the pristine lobby floor as he approached the reception desk, where a young woman in a perfect blazer looked up at him with barely concealed horror. "I'm here for an interview," Ryan said, trying for dignity and probably achieving something closer to pathetic. "Ryan Hale. I was supposed to meet with—" Mr. Hale. The receptionist's voice was professionally neutral, but her eyes told a different story. You were scheduled for 3 o'clock. I know, I'm sorry. There was an emergency, someone needed help, and they've moved on. The words were gentle but final, like a door closing. The position requires punctuality and reliability. When you didn't arrive on time and didn't call, the interview panel assumed you were no longer interested. I tried to call, Ryan said, hearing the desperation creeping into his voice and hating himself for it. I couldn't get a signal in the storm. Please. Is there any chance they could see me now? I know I'm late, but I'm sorry, Mr. Hale. The decision has been made. Just like that. 16 minutes late and the door was closed. Not just closed, locked, barred, sealed shut. Ryan stood there in his ruined clothes, dripping on their expensive floor, and felt the weight of what he'd just lost crushing down on him. Right, he managed. Thanks anyway. He turned and walked back toward the exit, each step feeling heavier than the last. Behind him, he heard the receptionist pick up her phone, probably calling maintenance to clean up the mess he'd made. It felt like a metaphor for his entire life, leaving destruction in his wake while trying desperately to hold things together. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving everything wet and gleaming under a sky that was starting to clear. Ryan stood on the sidewalk, watching people in expensive suits walk past him like he was invisible, and tried to calculate exactly how bad this was. His phone buzzed, a text from his landlord. Rent was due yesterday. Need payment by end of week or we need to talk. Another buzz. The electric company. Your account is past due. Service interruption scheduled for... Ryan closed his eyes and counted to 10, then 20, then gave up on counting and just breathed. Jake was at his friend Tommy's house for the afternoon, wouldn't be home until 6. That gave Ryan a few hours to figure out what he was going to tell his son. How did you explain to an 8-year-old that his father had just flushed their future down the drain to help a stranger? Because you needed help, and I could give it. His own words echoed in his head, and they sounded idiotic now. Noble intentions didn't pay rent, character didn't keep the lights on. He'd made a choice, and it had cost them everything, and there was no taking it back. Ryan was pulling his keys from his pocket, preparing to walk back to his truck and drive home to face whatever came next, when he heard it. The sound of a car pulling up behind him. Not just any car, the smooth, expensive purr of a vehicle that cost more than most people's houses. Ryan turned and his stomach dropped. It was a black SUV, sleek and pristine, with windows tinted so dark he couldn't see inside. It pulled right up to the curb where Ryan stood, and for a confused moment he thought maybe he was blocking someone important. He started to step aside. The rear door opened, and she stepped out. The woman from the mud looked completely different now. The destroyed suit was gone, replaced by an immaculate charcoal ensemble that probably cost more than Ryan's truck. Her hair was perfect, pulled back in a style that was somehow both severe and elegant. The running mascara had been fixed, the muddy heels swapped for ones that added 3 inches to her height. She looked polished, professional, powerful. She looked, Ryan realized with slowly dawning horror, like someone who belonged in a building like Crossline Systems. Ryan Hale, she said, and her voice was different too, calmer, more controlled, with an edge of command that hadn't been there in the rain. We need to talk. Ryan's mouth had gone dry. How did you know you'd be here? A slight smile touched her lips. Because this is where I work. This is my building. She held out her hand, professional and formal, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone used to changing lives with a single sentence. Evelyn Cross, CEO of Crossline Systems. And you, Mr. Hale, just passed an interview you didn't even know you were taking. The world tilted. Ryan stared at her extended hand, at the woman he'd pulled from the mud, at the CEO of the company he'd been trying to impress, and felt his entire understanding of the last hour reorganize itself into something he couldn't quite process. I don't understand, he managed. No, Evelyn agreed, still holding out her hand. But you will. Right now, I need you to come with me. We have a situation, and I believe you're exactly the person who can help with it. A situation? A crisis, actually. Our entire logistics system is failing as we speak. We're about to lose millions in contracts, and every expert we have is telling me it can't be fixed in time. Her eyes locked onto his, intense and evaluating. But I've learned to trust my instincts about people, Mr. Hale. And my instincts say you're someone who solves problems, even when it costs you everything. Ryan's head was spinning. Mrs. Cross, I appreciate whatever you're trying to do, but I'm not a systems expert. I work in a warehouse. I move boxes and drive forklifts. And yet you looked at a car stuck in mud and immediately knew how to extract it. You assessed the problem, calculated the risk, and executed the solution. That's not forklift driving, Mr. Hale. That's problem solving under pressure. She lowered her hand, seeming to realize he wasn't going to shake it yet. I was in that car for 20 minutes before you came along. In that time, 3 other vehicles passed me. 3 people saw someone in trouble and kept driving. Do you know why you're different? I really don't. Because you made a choice that hurt you to help someone else. No hesitation, no expectation of reward, just action when it was needed. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. I've interviewed 200 candidates for positions in this company over the past 5 years. I've seen every trick, every polished answer, every carefully rehearsed demonstration of leadership and initiative, but I've never actually seen someone prove their character when they thought no one was watching. Ryan felt like he was having a conversation in a language he didn't quite speak. So this was what? A test? No, it was luck. Terrible luck for me, extraordinary luck for both of us in retrospect. She gestured toward the building. I really was stuck. I really was going to be late for a critical meeting, and you really did sacrifice something important to help. I'm simply suggesting that maybe that sacrifice doesn't have to be for nothing. Everything in Ryan wanted to believe this was real, but he'd had too many hopes crushed to trust easy promises. You're offering me the logistics coordinator position? Because I pulled your car out of the mud? I'm offering you a chance to prove you can do more than that. Evelyn's smile faded, replaced by something sharper. The coordinator position is already filled. We hired someone this morning. But right now I have a much bigger problem, and I need someone who can think clearly under impossible circumstances. Come inside, look at the situation. If you can fix it, we'll talk about what comes next. If you can't, she shrugged. You're no worse off than you are standing here on this sidewalk. Ryan looked at the building, at Evelyn Cross standing before him like an impossible opportunity wrapped in designer clothing, at his truck parked in the lot with its rusted fender and failing transmission. He thought about Jake, about the bills, about the choice he'd made in the rain and the price he'd paid for it. He thought about the fact that he had absolutely nothing left to lose. Okay, Ryan said. Show me what you've got. Evelyn's smile returned, and this time it reached her eyes. Follow me, Mr. Hale. Let's see what you're really made of. She turned and walked toward the entrance, moving with the confidence of someone who owned every space she occupied. Ryan followed, his muddy shoes squeaking against the polished floor, his ruined clothes leaving water droplets in his wake. People stared as they passed. At Evelyn Cross, CEO of Crossline Systems, and the soggy, mud-covered man walking beside her like he belonged there. And somewhere in the back of Ryan's mind, beneath the disbelief and confusion and tentative hope, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, the rain hadn't washed away his future after all. Maybe it had revealed it. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt surreal. Ryan stood beside Evelyn Cross in a space that smelled like leather and expensive cologne, acutely aware of the mud still caking his shoes and the way his wet clothes were probably leaving stains on the pristine elevator floor. Evelyn seemed entirely unbothered by his appearance, her attention fixed on her phone as her thumbs moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. Status update? She said into the phone, pressing it to her ear with one fluid motion. Ryan couldn't hear the response, but he watched Evelyn's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. No, that's not acceptable. I'll be there in 30 seconds. She ended the call and glanced at Ryan. Fair warning, you're about to walk into a room full of very smart, very stressed people who are going to wonder why I brought someone who looks like he just crawled out of a river to help solve their crisis. Should I be concerned? Only if you care what they think. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I don't hire people based on consensus, Mr. Hale. I hire them based on capability. She stepped out into a corridor that screamed executive territory, More glass, more steel, more of everything that separated people like Evelyn Cross from people like Ryan. But there was an energy in the air that had nothing to do with aesthetics. Even from the hallway, Ryan could hear raised voices, the sharp percussion of fingers on keyboards, the barely controlled chaos of smart people confronting a problem they couldn't solve. Evelyn pushed through a set of double doors into what Ryan assumed was some kind of command center. The room was massive, dominated by a conference table that could seat 20 and walls covered in monitors displaying data streams, graphs, maps with flashing indicators, and columns of numbers that changed faster than Ryan could process. A dozen people in business attire clustered around laptops and tablets, their faces illuminated by screen glow and stress. Every head turned when Evelyn entered. The voices didn't exactly stop, but they lowered to a more respectful volume, like students when a principal walks into a chaotic classroom. "Report," Evelyn said, moving directly to the head of the table. A man in his 50s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses stepped forward. He had the bearing of someone important, someone used to being the smartest person in any given room, and right now he looked like that intelligence was failing him. "It's worse than we thought," he said, his voice tight. "The logistics algorithm isn't just experiencing delays. It's creating cascade failures across our entire distribution network. We have 42 facilities in 16 states trying to route shipments using corrupted data. Every automated decision the system makes is compounding the problem." "English, Marcus," Evelyn said, though not unkindly. Marcus gestured to one of the monitors where a map of the United States showed red dots spreading like a virus across multiple states. "We have trucks going to wrong destinations, inventory counts that don't match reality, shipments that are being routed in circles because the system can't calculate efficient paths anymore. We're 12 hours away from missing contractual delivery deadlines that will trigger penalty clauses worth approximately $7 million. And that's just the financial hit. The reputation damage could cost us 10 times that in future contracts." A woman with sharp features and sharper eyes spoke up from across the table. "We've had the best systems analysts working on it since 4 this morning. The consensus is that we need to take the entire network offline, manually verify every shipment currently in transit, and rebuild the routing from scratch. That's a minimum 48-hour process, which means we miss every deadline and trigger every penalty," another voice added from somewhere Ryan couldn't see. "We're essentially choosing between a guaranteed disaster and a slightly less guaranteed disaster." Evelyn's expression remained neutral, but Ryan could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. This wasn't just a technical problem. It was a company-threatening crisis. And based on the defeated energy in the room, these very smart, very expensive people had already concluded it was unsolvable in the time they had. "Show me the core issue," Evelyn said. Marcus pulled up a new screen, this one showing lines of code and data structures that meant nothing to Ryan. But he listened as Marcus explained in increasingly technical terms about algorithm corruption, database inconsistencies, and integration failures between legacy systems and new infrastructure. The other executives chimed in with their own analyses, each one more pessimistic than the last. Ryan stood near the door, forgotten for the moment, and watched. Not just the screens or the data, but the people. The way they talked about the problem revealed as much as the problem itself. They were focused on why it couldn't be fixed, not how it might be solved. They'd already accepted defeat and were now just managing the details of their failure. It reminded Ryan of conversations he'd had with other warehouse workers, the ones who'd spent so long working within broken systems that they'd stopped seeing alternatives. The ones who shrugged and said, "That's just how it is," when asked why processes were inefficient or dangerous. Learned helplessness dressed up in technical language. "What about the manual override protocols?" someone was asking. "Too slow. We'd need 3 times the staff we have just to process current volumes." "Can we bring in contractors?" "Not trained on our systems. They'd cause more problems than they'd solve." What if we prioritize the highest value contracts and let the smaller ones fail?" That's essentially triage. We're still looking at millions in losses and broken relationships with mid-tier clients. Evelyn listened to all of it, her face unreadable. Then her eyes found Ryan across the room, and something in her expression shifted. A challenge, maybe. Or a question. Ryan cleared his throat. The room fell silent. A dozen pairs of eyes turned toward him, this muddy stranger who had no business being in their crisis war room. The looks ranged from curious to annoyed to openly hostile. Marcus's expression suggested he thought Evelyn had lost her mind bringing an outsider into this situation. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his tone polite but edged with steel. "Who exactly are you?" "Ryan Hale," Ryan said, his voice steadier than he felt. "And I think you're all looking at this wrong." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. A woman near the back actually laughed, though it was more disbelief than humor. "Excuse me?" Marcus said. Ryan looked at Evelyn, half expecting her to tell him to be quiet, to let the professionals handle it, but she just raised an eyebrow, a subtle invitation to continue, or maybe permission to hang himself. "You're treating this like a systems problem," Ryan said, moving closer to the table, to the screens showing all that data. "But it's not. It's a priorities problem." "I don't think you understand the complexity of them," someone started, but Evelyn held up a hand. "Let him finish." Ryan pointed at the map with all the red dots. "You've got trucks heading to wrong destinations, right? Shipments going in circles. But they're still moving. The trucks are still running. The drivers still know how to drive. The facilities still exist. The infrastructure isn't broken. The brain telling the infrastructure what to do is broken." "That's literally what we've been saying," the sharp-eyed woman said, her tone suggesting she thought Ryan was an idiot. "Right. So stop using the broken brain." Ryan looked around the room at all these intelligent faces staring at him like he'd suggested they solve the problem with magic. "You're waiting for the algorithm to be fixed so it can tell your trucks where to go. But you don't need the algorithm. You need someone who understands logistics to tell the trucks where to go." "Manual routing?" Marcus shook his head. "As we already explained, that's impossible at this scale. We have hundreds of shipments, thousands of delivery points, multiple priority tiers." "I heard you," Ryan interrupted, which earned him several sharp looks. "You said you can't do it with your current staff in the time you have. But that's because you're thinking about routing every single shipment perfectly. You don't need perfect, you just need good enough to meet your critical deadlines." He moved to the screen showing the cascade of failures. "Look at this. You've got shipments that are already close to their destinations, but the corrupted system is rerouting them away. You've got trucks sitting idle in facilities because the algorithm can't decide where to send them next. You've got drivers waiting for instructions that aren't coming. That's not a system problem, that's a communication problem." "Simplify it," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the murmurs starting to ripple around the room. Ryan took a breath. This was the moment where he either proved he belonged in this room or confirmed he was an idiot who should have stayed in his truck. "Forget the algorithm exists. Pull up your highest priority contracts, the ones with the biggest penalties if you miss deadlines. Map where those shipments are right now versus where they need to be. Then manually route them using the shortest direct paths, even if it's not efficient. Forget optimization. Just get those specific trucks to those specific destinations." "That's caveman logistics," someone muttered. "It's also fast," Ryan countered. "And while your critical shipments are being handled manually, you buy time to fix the algorithm for everything else. You don't solve the whole problem at once. You prioritize survival, then optimization." The room was quiet for a moment, processing. Ryan could see the wheels turning, people running calculations, testing his logic for holes. "It's an interesting theory," Marcus said carefully, "but the execution would be—" "Let me see your current routing data," Ryan said, surprising himself with the demand. "Not the algorithm, the actual locations of your trucks right now, and the destinations for your top-tier contracts." Marcus looked at Evelyn, clearly unsure whether to humor this. Evelyn nodded once, and Marcus pulled up a new display. It showed a list of shipments, their current locations, their intended destinations, and their deadline windows. There were 20 items on the list, each one marked as critical priority. Ryan studied the screen, his mind automatically sorting the information into patterns. This was what he did all day at the warehouse, just on a smaller scale, figuring out how to move things from point A to point B with limited resources and tight timeframes. The principles were the same whether you were routing trucks across 16 states or organizing pallets in a loading bay. "Okay," he said, pointing to the third item on the list. This shipment is currently in Columbus, Ohio, needs to be in Pittsburgh by tomorrow morning. The algorithm is trying to route it through Cleveland first because that's supposedly more efficient. But Cleveland is the opposite direction. Just send it directly to Pittsburgh. It's a 4-hour drive. Problem solved. The algorithm routes through Cleveland to pick up additional cargo for consolidation, someone started. Forget consolidation. This is triage, remember? Ryan moved to the next item. This one's in Phoenix, needs to be in Las Vegas by midnight tonight. It's sitting in a facility waiting for routing instructions that aren't coming because the system is hung up on calculating the optimal path. Send it now on the most direct route. It'll make it with hours to spare. He went down the list, one by one, and for each critical shipment he identified the same pattern. The algorithm was overthinking, trying to optimize for efficiency, even though its corruption meant those optimizations were actually creating delays. The solution wasn't to fix the algorithm in the next 12 hours. The solution was to bypass it entirely for the shipments that mattered most, and use simple, direct routing based on nothing more complicated than basic geography and time management. By the time Ryan finished, the room had gone from skeptical to thoughtfully silent. Marcus was making notes on his tablet, his expression no longer dismissive. The sharp-eyed woman was running numbers on her laptop, and Ryan could see her grudgingly nodding. "This could work," she said, sounding almost annoyed about it. "For the critical tier, at least. We'd still have significant losses on secondary contracts, but we'd avoid the catastrophic penalty triggers." "How quickly could we implement this?" Evelyn asked. "If we reassign our logistics coordinators from algorithm troubleshooting to manual routing, we could have the critical shipments redirected within the hour," Marcus said, already typing commands into his tablet. "We'd need someone to oversee the manual routing process, make real-time decisions as situations develop." "Mr. Hale will handle that," Evelyn said. Every head snapped toward Ryan, including Ryan's, metaphorically speaking. "I'm sorry, what?" he managed. Evelyn's smile was sharp. "You identified the solution. You understand the logic behind it. It makes sense you'd be the one to implement it." "Mrs. Cross, I don't work here. I don't have access to your systems. I don't know your protocols." "Marcus, set Mr. Hale up with a terminal and guest credentials. Walk him through our communications system so he can issue routing instructions to facility managers and drivers." Evelyn's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. "Anyone who has objections to following Mr. Hale's directions can discuss them with me later. Right now, we're going with his plan." "This is insane," someone muttered, not quite quietly enough. "This is decisive action in a crisis," Evelyn corrected. "Which is exactly what we pay you all to provide, and exactly what none of you were providing 10 minutes ago. So either help implement this solution or get out of the way." The room mobilized. People grabbed laptops, started making calls, pulled up screens and data streams. The energy had shifted from defeated to purposeful, like a machine that had been stalled suddenly roaring back to life. Marcus approached Ryan with a tablet and a look that suggested he still thought this was madness, but was professional enough to follow orders. "Come with me. I'll show you how to communicate with our facilities." Ryan followed him to a workstation near the window, his heart hammering. What had just happened? 10 minutes ago, he'd been standing on a sidewalk contemplating his ruined life, and now he was apparently in charge of salvaging a multi-million-dollar crisis for a company he didn't work for, using methods he'd improvised on the spot. Marcus pulled up a communications interface on the tablet and began explaining with the patience of someone teaching a child to use a phone. Each facility has a code. You enter the code, type your message, and it goes directly to the operations manager on site. They'll confirm receipt and implementation. The system also shows you real-time GPS data for every truck in our fleet. See here? You can track which ones are moving, which are stationary, and compare that against the delivery schedule. Ryan absorbed the information as quickly as Marcus could provide it, asking questions when things weren't clear, making mental notes about which functions would be most critical. It was overwhelming, but not incomprehensible. The interface was actually fairly intuitive once you understood the logic behind it. "What about drivers?" Ryan asked. "Can I communicate directly with them?" "Not recommended. Everything goes through facility managers who then relay to drivers. It maintains chain of command and prevents confusion." Marcus paused, studying Ryan with undisguised curiosity. "Where did you learn logistics?" A warehouse in Brooklyn. I've been moving freight for 6 years. Brooklyn. Marcus repeated the word like it was a foreign concept. And you think that qualifies you to route a national distribution network? Ryan met his gaze steadily. I think the principles of moving things efficiently from one place to another don't change just because the scale does. A pallet, or a truck, a warehouse, or a country, you're still solving the same basic problem. That's remarkably reductive. Maybe, but it seems to be working. Marcus didn't have a response to that. He handed Ryan the tablet and stepped back. The critical shipment list is on your primary screen. Good luck, Mr. Hale. You're going to need it. Ryan looked down at the tablet, at the list of 20 critical shipments representing millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs, and felt the weight of what he'd just volunteered for. No, not volunteered, been volunteered for. By a woman who decided based on watching him pull a car out of mud that he could handle corporate crisis management. It should have terrified him. Maybe it did. But beneath the fear was something else, something Ryan hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The sense that what he did in the next few hours actually mattered. He pulled up the first shipment on the list and started typing instructions. The first hour was chaos. Ryan sent routing instructions to facilities across the country, and half of them came back with questions or pushback. Drivers were confused about why they were suddenly receiving different directions than what the algorithm had told them. Facility managers wanted to know who Ryan was and why they should listen to him. And through it all, Ryan had to make split-second decisions about routes, delivery windows, and priorities while a room full of executives watched his every move. But slowly, gradually, the red dots on the map started moving in the right directions. Phoenix shipment is en route to Vegas, someone called out. ETA shows they'll arrive with 2 hours to spare. Columbus to Pittsburgh shipment just passed the halfway point, on schedule for early morning delivery. Dallas facility confirms they've rerouted the Austin shipment using the direct path. Should hit the deadline window with 40 minutes to spare. Each small victory felt massive. Ryan barely noticed when Marcus sat down beside him, pulling up additional screens to help track multiple shipments simultaneously. He didn't register when the sharp-eyed woman, whose name turned out to be Patricia, started fielding communications from facilities so Ryan could focus on routing decisions. The room had reorganized itself around his impromptu command center, and what had started as skepticism had shifted into something that looked almost like teamwork. We've got a problem, Patricia said, 2 hours in. The Denver shipment hit construction traffic. They're not going to make the deadline unless we can find an alternate route. Ryan pulled up the GPS data, studied the truck's current location and the destination address. How much time do we have? 3 hours to cover 120 miles. Normally easy, but this traffic backup could cost them an hour or more. Ryan traced possible routes on the screen with his finger, mentally calculating drive times and potential obstacles. There's a service road that runs parallel to the main highway. It's slower normally, but with the construction, it might actually be faster. Can we get local traffic data? Marcus was already pulling it up. Service road is clear, but it adds 15 miles to the total distance. 15 miles at 60 miles per hour is 15 minutes. An hour stuck in construction traffic is an hour. Tell them to take the service road. Patricia relayed the instructions. The truck's GPS dot on the screen shifted, moving off the main highway onto the alternate route. They watched it progress, and Ryan realized he was holding his breath. 20 minutes later, Patricia looked up from her screen with something approaching respect. Denver truck just reported they're past the construction zone and back on the main highway. They'll make the deadline with time to spare. A small cheer went up from somewhere in the room. Ryan felt the tension in his shoulders ease just slightly. 19 down, 1 to go. The last critical shipment was the most complicated. It was currently in Atlanta, needed to be in Miami by midnight, and the driver had just reported mechanical issues with the truck. They were going to miss the deadline unless they could find an alternative solution fast. Can we get another truck? Ryan asked. Not in time. Our nearest available vehicle is 3 hours away, and by the time it reaches Atlanta, loads the cargo, and drives to Miami, we've blown the deadline by 5 hours. Ryan stared at the screen, his brain churning through options. What if we don't drive it? I'm sorry? What if we send it by air? There must be freight services that can get cargo from Atlanta to Miami in a few hours. Marcus was already shaking his head. The cost would be astronomical. We're talking about a full truckload of merchandise. The air freight alone would exceed the profit margin on the entire contract. But it would meet the deadline and avoid the penalty clause, right? Well, yes, but... And the penalty for missing the deadline is how much? Marcus checked his screen. $200,000. How much would express air freight cost? Probably 50, 60,000, maybe more. Then we're still coming out 140,000 ahead. Ryan looked at Evelyn, who had been watching silently from across the room for the past hour. Unless I'm missing something about how this works? Evelyn's expression was unreadable, but her eyes held what might have been approval. You're not missing anything, Mr. Hale. Marcus, arrange the air freight. Bill it to crisis management. Marcus nodded and moved to make it happen, though his expression suggested this was the most unorthodox solution he'd encountered in 20 years of logistics work. Ryan leaned back in his chair, suddenly aware that his shirt had dried into stiff, uncomfortable wrinkles and his feet hurt from standing in wet shoes for hours. The adrenaline that had been powering him was starting to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Is that all of them? He asked Patricia. She scanned her screens, double-checking. That's all 20 critical shipments, routed, tracked, and on schedule to meet deadlines with minimal penalties. Well, what's the damage on the secondary contracts? Significant, but not catastrophic. We're looking at about $2 million in losses from missed deliveries and penalty clauses, but we've avoided the $7 million we were facing an hour ago. And we've bought enough time to properly fix the algorithm before the situation deteriorates further. $2 million. Ryan tried to comprehend that number, couldn't really, and settled for understanding that he'd apparently just saved someone $5 million using nothing more sophisticated than common sense and basic geography. The room had begun to relax, the crisis energy fading into relief and exhaustion. People were closing laptops, stretching, having quiet conversations about what had just happened. And through it all, Ryan felt eyes on him, evaluating, reassessing, seeing him differently than they had 3 hours ago. Evelyn crossed the room to where Ryan sat. My office. Now. She turned and walked out without waiting for a response. Ryan glanced at Marcus, who gave him a look that was equal parts sympathy and congratulation, then followed Evelyn into the hallway. Her office was on the 8th floor, accessible via a private elevator that required a key card Ryan didn't have. Evelyn swiped them in, and they rode up in silence that felt heavier than the comfortable quiet of the crisis war room. The office itself was exactly what Ryan expected. Massive, beautifully designed, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that probably cost more per year than Ryan had earned in his entire working life. Evelyn moved behind her desk but didn't sit, instead standing with her hands resting on the back of her chair. Do you know what just happened down there? She asked. Ryan shrugged, too tired to pretend confidence. I helped fix a problem? You walked into a room full of people with advanced degrees and decades of combined experience, people I pay enormous salaries to solve exactly these kinds of problems, and you solved in minutes what they'd been failing to solve for hours. Evelyn's tone wasn't critical of her staff. It was observational, analytical. Do you know why? Because I didn't know enough to think it was impossible? Partially. Also because you weren't invested in the complex solution. My people were so focused on fixing the algorithm, on solving the problem the right way, that they couldn't see the simple solution right in front of them. She moved around the desk, leaning against it, her posture more relaxed now. That's a rare quality, Mr. Hale. The ability to cut through complexity to find the essential truth of a problem. Ryan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. Tell me about your son. The question caught Ryan completely off guard. What? You mentioned you have a son. Earlier, when we were in the rain, you said you needed this job for your family. Ryan's defenses went up automatically, but there was something in Evelyn's tone that wasn't prying. It was genuinely curious. Jake? He's 8. It's just the two of us. His mother? Died 3 years ago. Cancer. The words still hurt to say, even after all this time. I'm sorry. And she sounded like she meant it. That's why you stopped, isn't it? In the rain, because you know what it's like to be alone when you need help. Ryan hadn't thought about it that way, but maybe she was right. Maybe some part of him had seen Sarah and that stranded woman, had remembered all the times they'd needed help, and people had looked away. Maybe. Character isn't what we do when it's convenient, Mr. Hale. It's what we do when it costs us everything. Evelyn moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. I built this company from nothing. 20 years ago, I was a junior analyst making $30,000 a year, drowning in student debt and watching men with half my competence get promoted above me because they looked the part and I didn't. I could have played their game, could have smoothed my edges and fit into their boxes. Instead, I decided to build my own box. She turned back to face him. In those 20 years, I've learned that the people worth hiring aren't the ones with perfect resumes and polished interviews. They're the ones who prove themselves when it matters. You proved yourself twice today, Mr. Hale. Once in the mud and once in that war room. Ryan's heart was starting to hammer again. What are you saying? I'm saying that the logistics coordinator position was filled this morning, as I told you, but I have a different position in mind now, something better suited to what I saw from you today. Mrs. Cross, 6-figure salary, full benefits. Leadership role in our crisis management division, reporting directly to Marcus and, on critical projects, to me. Your job would be exactly what you did today, cutting through complex problems to find workable solutions under pressure. And before you tell me you're not qualified, remember that 3 hours ago, an entire room of qualified people thought they were watching their company hemorrhage millions of dollars. You stopped that hemorrhage with a tablet and some common sense. Ryan's mind was reeling. This morning he'd been hoping for $85,000 a year. Now this woman was offering him something that sounded like it paid significantly more, with responsibilities he couldn't even fully comprehend, based on an afternoon of improvised problem solving. I need to think about this, he heard himself say. Evelyn smiled. No, you don't. You need to say yes. But I understand the impulse to be cautious. She moved to her desk, pulled out a business card, and wrote something on the back. This is my direct line. Take tonight. Talk to your son. Then call me tomorrow with your answer. She held out the card. Ryan took it, feeling the weight of expensive cardstock between his fingers. One more thing, Evelyn said as Ryan turned to leave. The choice you made today, in the rain, that wasn't stupid, regardless of how it felt at the time. That was character. And character is the only thing in this world that can't be taught, or faked, or bought. Remember that. Ryan nodded, not trusting his voice, and left her office. He made his way back down to the lobby, past the receptionist who'd turned him away hours ago, and who now watched him with undisguised curiosity, and out into the parking lot where his battered truck sat waiting. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Ryan climbed into the truck, closed the door, and sat in silence for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and called Tommy's mom. Hey, Ryan, she answered warmly. Jake's fine, having a blast. You want to pick him up? Actually, would you mind keeping him for dinner? I'll get him by 8. Something came up. Of course. Everything okay? Ryan looked at the Crossline Systems building, at the card in his hand with Evelyn Cross's direct number, at his mud-stained clothes and ruined shoes. Yeah, he said, and realized he meant it. Everything's okay. He drove home slowly, processing the impossible day, and tried to figure out how he was going to explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes the worst decisions turn into the best opportunities. That sometimes helping people when it hurts leads to places you never imagined you could reach. That sometimes, just sometimes, character was enough. Ryan's apartment had never felt smaller than it did that evening. He sat at the kitchen table, a scratched thrift store find that wobbled unless you put a folded napkin under one leg, and stared at Evelyn Cross's business card like it might suddenly reveal itself to be a hallucination. The expensive cardstock felt foreign between his calloused fingers, too pristine for a place where the refrigerator hummed ominously and the faucet dripped no matter how tight you turned it. 6 figures. Leadership role, crisis management division. The words kept cycling through his mind, refusing to settle into anything that felt real. This morning he'd been one missed rent payment away from eviction. Tonight he was apparently being offered a position that could change everything. The whiplash of it was making him dizzy. Ryan's phone buzzed with a text from Tommy's mom. Jake wants to know if you're picking him up soon. Says he misses you. Ryan checked the time, 7:30. He told her 8, but suddenly he couldn't wait another 30 minutes. He needed to see his son, needed something real and solid to anchor him to earth before he floated away on the surreal impossibility of this day. On my way now, he typed back. The drive to Tommy's house took 15 minutes through evening traffic. Ryan spent the entire time trying to figure out how to explain today to Jake without making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. What if Evelyn changed her mind overnight? What if she'd made the offer in the heat of the moment and would regret it by morning? What if Ryan had misunderstood something fundamental about what she was proposing? But when he pulled up to the modest two-story where Tommy's family lived and saw Jake burst through the front door with that gap-toothed grin that could light up the darkest day, all of Ryan's spiraling thoughts quieted. This was what mattered, not the job or the money or the impossible opportunity. Just this 8-year-old boy who'd been through too much and deserved so much more. Dad! Jake ran down the walkway and threw himself at Ryan with the full-body enthusiasm only children could manage. Tommy's mom made spaghetti, and we played video games, and his dog learned a new trick where he rolls over if you give him a treat. And can we get a dog, please? I'll take care of it, I promise. I'll walk him and feed him and everything. Slow down, buddy, Ryan laughed, ruffling Jake's hair. It was getting long again, past due for a cut they couldn't afford. One thing at a time. But can we? Get a dog? Ryan glanced up to see Tommy's mom, Linda, standing in the doorway with a knowing smile. She was a good woman, a widow herself, and she'd been a lifeline for Ryan more times than he could count. She waved and Ryan waved back, mouthing a thank you that earned him a nod. Let's talk about it, Ryan said to Jake, which was the same thing he always said when the answer was probably no, but he couldn't bear to say it outright. Jake's face fell slightly. He was getting old enough to recognize deflection. But he bounced back quickly, launching into a detailed account of his afternoon as they walked to the truck. Ryan listened, made the appropriate responses, and felt the familiar ache of knowing he couldn't give his son everything a kid should have. Not the dog, not the new video games Tommy had, not the sneakers without holes or the bedroom that wasn't also the living room. But maybe, a small voice whispered, maybe that was about to change. They drove home in comfortable silence after Jake exhausted his story supply. The sun had fully set now, and the streetlights painted everything in that orange glow that made even run-down neighborhoods look almost pretty. Ryan pulled into their building's parking lot and killed the engine, and for a moment neither of them moved. Dad? Jake's voice was quieter now, more serious. Are you okay? Ryan looked at his son, at those eyes that were too much like Sarah's, and felt his throat tighten. Yeah, buddy, I'm okay. Why? You seem different. Not bad different, just different. Jake fidgeted with his seatbelt. Did something happen today? Kids. They saw everything, understood more than adults gave them credit for. Ryan took a breath and made a decision. Something did happen, he said carefully. Something weird and unexpected and maybe really good. Jake's eyes widened. What? Come on, let's go inside and I'll tell you about it. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The elevator was broken more often than it worked, so they took the stairs, Jake bounding ahead with the endless energy of youth, while Ryan followed with legs that suddenly remembered they'd been standing in wet clothes for hours. Inside, the apartment was exactly as they'd left it, small, cluttered with the debris of their life, but clean. Ryan had always insisted on clean, even when everything else was falling apart. Jake dropped his backpack by the door and turned to Ryan with an expectation that was almost painful in its intensity. Okay, tell me. Ryan moved to the kitchen, partly to give his hands something to do, and partly because he needed the familiar ritual of making hot chocolate for Jake. It was one of their things, their end-of-day traditions, and right now Ryan needed the normalcy of it. You know that job interview I had today? He started, pulling out the cocoa powder and milk. The important one. That's why I went to Tommy's house. Right. Well, on the way there, I saw someone who needed help. Ryan measured powder into a mug, his hand steady despite the tremor he felt inside. A woman whose car was stuck in the mud during the storm. Jake climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs, tucking his legs under him. Did you help her? I did. I pulled her car out with the truck. That's good. Jake said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Of course his dad would help someone. That's what people did. Yeah, but it made me late for the interview. Ryan poured milk into a pot, turned on the stove. Really late, and when I got there, they told me they'd already moved on to other candidates. Jake's face fell. Oh. I thought I'd messed everything up. I thought stopping to help that woman was the stupidest decision I could have made. The milk started to warm, and Ryan stirred it slowly, watching small bubbles form at the edges. Turns out the woman I helped was the CEO of the company I was interviewing with. Jake's mouth dropped open. No way. Way. And she'd been watching how I handled things, not just pulling her car out, but how I made the choice to help even though it cost me something important. Ryan poured the hot milk over the cocoa powder, stirred until it was smooth. She brought me into the company anyway. They were having this big problem, losing millions of dollars, and she asked me to help figure it out. Did you? I did. Ryan handed Jake the mug, watching his son's face light up at the simple pleasure of hot chocolate. I figured out a way to solve their problem in a few hours when all their experts said it would take days. Because you're smart, Jake said with complete confidence, like this was an established fact. Ryan's chest tightened. Because I looked at it differently than they did. And now, he paused, making sure he had Jake's full attention. Now the CEO wants to offer me a different job. A better one. With more money. A lot more money. Jake went very still, his eyes huge over the rim of his mug. How much more? Enough that we wouldn't have to worry about rent anymore. Enough for new shoes when you need them. Enough that maybe we could talk seriously about that dog. The mug clattered against the table as Jake set it down too fast, hot chocolate sloshing over the side. Really? Dad? Really? Really? If I take the job, why wouldn't you take it? Jake's voice had gone high with excitement and confusion. That's amazing. Ryan pulled out the chair across from Jake and sat down heavily. This was the hard part, the part where he had to be honest about his fears with an 8-year-old who deserved honesty even when it was uncomfortable. Because I'm scared, he admitted. This job, Jake, it's way beyond anything I've ever done. I'd be working with people who went to fancy colleges and have years of experience in things I barely understand. What if I mess it up? What if I can't actually do what they're asking? What if they realize they made a mistake offering it to me? Jake was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he said, with the devastating wisdom of children, "But you already did it, today. You fixed their problem." Once? What if I can't do it again? Then you'll figure it out. Jake said it with such simple certainty. That's what you always do. When Mom got sick, you figured out how to take care of me and work and everything. When the car broke, you figured out how to fix it. When I had trouble with math homework, you figured out how to help even though you said you were never good at math. He picked up his mug again, took a sip. You always figure it out, Dad. That's your thing. Ryan felt something crack open in his chest, some tight knot of fear and doubt loosening just slightly. Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah used to say. She'd loved that phrase, had used it whenever Jake said something unexpectedly profound. And here he was doing it again, cutting through his father's spiraling anxiety with pure, uncomplicated logic. You think I should take it? Ryan asked. I think you're scared because it's big and different, but being scared isn't a reason not to do something. You told me that. When I didn't want to go to school after Mom died because I was scared the other kids would ask about her. Jake's voice wavered slightly at the memory, but he pushed through. You said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the thing anyway. Ryan reached across the table and took his son's hand, squeezed it gently. When did you get so smart? I had a good teacher, Jake said, squeezing back. They finished the hot chocolate in comfortable silence, and then Ryan supervised while Jake got ready for bed. Their nighttime routine was well-worn and familiar, teeth brushed, pajamas on, the battered copy of whatever book they were reading together retrieved from the nightstand. Tonight it was a fantasy novel about dragons and knights that Jake had checked out from the school library so many times the librarian had joked about just giving it to them. Jake climbed into bed and Ryan settled into the chair beside it. But before he could open the book, Jake spoke up. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. If you take this job and we have more money, will things be different? Like, will you be different? The question hit Ryan harder than he expected. What do you mean? Jake picked at a loose thread on his blanket. Tommy's dad used to be really fun. Then he got a big promotion at work, and he was never home anymore. And when he was home, he was always tired and grumpy. Tommy says it's like having a different dad. Ryan closed the book and set it aside. This conversation was more important than dragons and knights. Jake, look at me. Jake did. His eyes worried in a way that made him look older than 8. Money might change some things, Ryan said carefully. We might be able to afford a better apartment, or new clothes, or maybe a dog. But it won't change who I am. It won't change that you're the most important thing in my world. Nothing is more important than that. Not money, not jobs, not anything. Promise? I promise. If this job ever starts making me forget what matters, you have permission to remind me. Deal? Jake's worried expression eased into a small smile. Deal. Ryan opened the book and read 3 chapters before Jake's breathing deepened into sleep. He sat there for a while longer, watching his son's peaceful face, and thought about all the promises he'd made over the years. To Sarah, that he'd take care of their son no matter what. To Jake, that they'd be okay even when okay seemed impossible. To himself, that he wouldn't let fear stop him from giving Jake the life he deserved. Tomorrow he'd call Evelyn Cross and accept her offer. Tonight, he'd sit here in this cramped apartment with his sleeping son and let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was about to get better. Ryan woke the next morning to pale sunlight streaming through the thin curtains and the smell of something burning. He bolted upright, his brain immediately cataloging disaster scenarios, and stumbled into the kitchen to find Jake standing on a chair in front of the stove, wielding a spatula like a weapon against a pan of what might have once been eggs. I was trying to make breakfast, Jake said sheepishly. Like you do. But the eggs got stuck and then they got black and I don't think they're good anymore. Ryan couldn't help but laugh, even as he quickly turned off the stove and assessed the damage. The eggs were definitely beyond saving, and there was a suspicious smell suggesting the smoke alarm had been mercifully patient. But Jake's face was so earnest, so proud of his attempted contribution, that Ryan could only ruffle his hair and pull him into a hug. Nice try, buddy. How about we order breakfast instead? My treat. You never say my treat, Jake pointed out. You always say we'll have to make do. Yeah, well, things might be changing. Ryan pulled out his phone, looking at the time. 8:15. After we eat, I need to make an important phone call. Think you can keep yourself busy for a bit? Jake's eyes lit up with understanding. The job. You're going to say yes. I'm going to say yes. They ordered breakfast from the diner down the street, pancakes and bacon, the kind of meal they usually reserve for birthdays or special occasions. While they waited for delivery, Ryan showered and changed into clean clothes that weren't caked with yesterday's mud. He caught sight of himself in the bathroom mirror and paused. Same face, same tired eyes, same 5 o'clock shadow he never quite managed to eliminate. But something was different. There was a quality to his expression he hadn't seen in years. Hope, maybe. Or possibility. The food arrived just as Jake was building an elaborate fortress out of couch cushions. They ate at the kitchen table, and Ryan tried not to think about how this might be one of the last times they ate breakfast in this cramped apartment. If the job was real, if everything Evelyn had promised actually materialized, they could afford something better. A real bedroom for Jake. A kitchen where the faucet didn't leak. Maybe even a yard for that hypothetical dog. You're doing it again, Jake said around a mouthful of pancake. Doing what? That thing where you're thinking so hard your face gets all wrinkly. Ryan laughed. Eat your breakfast, smart guy. At 9 o'clock, with Jake safely occupied by cartoons in the living room, Ryan retreated to his bedroom, which was really just a corner of the apartment separated by a bookshelf, and pulled out Evelyn Cross's business card. The number written on the back seemed to pulse with significance. 1 phone call. That's all it would take to say yes to this new life. He dialed before he could overthink it. Evelyn answered on the second ring. Ryan, I was hoping you'd call this morning. You knew I would? I had a feeling. People who make the right choice in the rain tend to make the right choice in other situations too. There was a smile in her voice. I assume you're calling with good news? Ryan took a breath. I'm calling to say yes. I'll take the position. Excellent. Can you come to the office today? We have paperwork to finalize, and I want to introduce you to your team properly. Say 11 o'clock. Today? Ryan glanced at Jake, who was sprawled on the couch in pajamas, completely absorbed in his cartoon. I have my son. Bring him. We have a children's lounge with activities. It's Saturday, so the office is quieter anyway. You won't be long. Ryan agreed, ended the call, and sat for a moment processing the fact that his life had just officially changed direction. Then he went to tell Jake they were going on an adventure. The drive to Crossline Systems felt different in daylight without the rain. The building looked less imposing, more welcoming, though still far more impressive than anything Ryan had expected to be associated with professionally. Jake pressed his face against the truck window as they pulled into the parking lot, taking in the glass and steel architecture with wide eyes. This is where you're gonna work? He breathed. Dad, this place is huge. Yeah, it is. Ryan parked the truck, and it looked even more out of place in the lot full of expensive sedans and SUVs than it had yesterday. But he was learning that appearances weren't everything. Yesterday he'd looked like a drowned rat, and had still managed to save a multi-million-dollar company from disaster. They walked through the lobby, and the same receptionist who'd turned Ryan away yesterday looked up with a startled expression that quickly morphed into something more respectful. Mr. Hale, she said, standing, Mrs. Cross is expecting you, 8th floor, and she said to bring your son directly to her office. Jake glanced up at Ryan with an impressed look. The elevator ride up was quiet, Jake taking in every detail of the polished interior like he was memorizing it for later. When the doors opened on the 8th floor, Evelyn was waiting. She'd dressed down for Saturday, or what passed for dress down when you were a CEO, which meant expensive jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Ryan's rent. But her smile was genuine when she saw them. You must be Jake, she said, crouching slightly to meet his eyes. I'm Evelyn. Your dad helped my company solve a very big problem yesterday. Jake straightened up, clearly trying to look mature. I know, he's good at that, solving problems. He certainly is. Evelyn straightened and gestured down the hall. Come with me. I want to show you something before we do the boring paperwork. She led them past her office to a different door that opened into a bright, colorful room that looked like it had been designed by someone who actually remembered what kids liked. There were games, books, art supplies, and a couple of tablets set up with educational programs. 2 other children were already there, supervised by a friendly-looking woman who introduced herself as Monica. Jake, you're welcome to stay here while your dad and I talk business, Evelyn said. Monica has snacks if you get hungry, and there's pretty much every game you could want. Jake looked at Ryan for permission, got a nod, and immediately gravitated toward the elaborate train set in the corner. Within seconds, he was absorbed, and Ryan felt a pang of gratitude for this woman who'd thought to make this part easier. He's a good kid, Evelyn observed as they walked back toward her office. He is, better than I deserve. I doubt that. She held open her office door, and Ryan stepped into the space that had intimidated him yesterday, but seemed less overwhelming now. Before we start with the formalities, I want to be completely transparent with you about what this job entails and what I'm expecting. Ryan sat in one of the chairs across from her desk, trying to look professional, despite the fact that his nicest outfit was the one currently ruined by mud and rain. I appreciate that. Evelyn settled into her chair and pulled out a folder. The position I'm offering you is Crisis Management Specialist, reporting to Marcus Chen with direct access to me when situations warrant it. The base salary is $135,000 annually, with performance bonuses that could add another $20,000 to $30,000 depending on results. Full benefits including health insurance, dental, vision, and a 401k with company matching. Ryan's brain stuttered on the number. $135,000. He'd been hoping for $85,000, and she was offering him almost 60% more than that. Your primary role will be exactly what you did yesterday, coming into crisis situations with fresh eyes and finding practical solutions that others might overlook. Sometimes that will mean logistics problems like yesterday. Other times it might be personnel conflicts, operational inefficiencies, or strategic challenges. You won't be expected to know everything about every system we have. You will be expected to ask smart questions, challenge assumptions, and think creatively under pressure. That sounds, Ryan searched for the right word, vague. It is vague, intentionally so. I'm not hiring you to follow a script, Ryan. I'm hiring you to do what you did in that storm. Make the right choice even when it's hard, even when it costs you something. Evelyn leaned forward. Here's what I learned about you in the span of a few hours yesterday. You prioritize people over convenience. You can identify the core of a complex problem. You don't get paralyzed by not knowing all the answers. And you're willing to trust your judgment even when everyone else in the room has more credentials than you. Those aren't teachable skills. Those are character traits, and they're exactly what I need in this role. Ryan absorbed this, trying to reconcile the woman across from him with the panicked person he'd pulled from the mud. Can I ask you something? Of course. Were you really stuck yesterday, or was that some kind of test? Evelyn laughed, and it was genuine and unguarded. I was absolutely stuck, and furious about it, and terrified I was going to miss a board meeting that had taken 6 months to schedule. There was no test, no grand plan, just a woman who made a bad navigation decision in a storm and paid the price for it. She paused. But once you stopped, once I saw how you handled the situation, yes, I started evaluating you differently than I would have in a formal interview. Call it opportunistic assessment. And you think that's enough to base a hiring decision on? I've made worse decisions on much flimsier evidence. At least I've seen you perform under actual pressure, not hypothetical scenarios in an interview room. Evelyn slid the folder across the desk toward him. This is your offer letter and employment contract. Standard confidentiality agreements, non-compete clauses, all the usual corporate protections. Take it home, read it thoroughly. If you have questions or want to negotiate anything, we can discuss it. Ryan opened the folder, scanning the dense legal text that might as well have been written in another language. Should I have a lawyer look at this? That would be smart, yes. If you don't have one, I can recommend someone who specializes in employment law, independent of the company so you can trust their advice. She wrote a name and number on a notepad, tore off the page, and handed it to him. Take the weekend. We'll aim to have you start Monday if everything checks out. That gives us today and tomorrow for you to review everything and for me to set up your workspace and brief your team. My team? You'll be working with Marcus primarily, and Patricia will coordinate with you on specific projects. You'll also have access to me directly when situations warrant it. I don't believe in artificial hierarchies when we're in crisis mode. If you need to reach me, you reach me. Ryan looked at the folder in his hands, at the offer letter with that impossible salary written in black and white, and felt the full weight of what he was agreeing to. What if I fail? What if I can't repeat what I did yesterday? Evelyn's expression softened. Then you'll fail, and we'll figure out what went wrong and how to do better next time. Ryan, I'm not expecting perfection. I'm expecting effort, honesty, and that same quality of judgment you showed yesterday. The rest we can build as we go. She stood, signaling the meeting was wrapping up. Ryan stood too, still holding the folder like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. Go get your son, Evelyn said. Take him somewhere fun this weekend. Celebrate. Then read that contract carefully and call me Monday morning with any questions. We'll move forward from there. Ryan nodded, managed a somewhat coherent thank you, and made his way back to the children's lounge where Jake was deep in an elaborate train track construction project with one of the other kids. When he saw Ryan, he jumped up excitedly. Dad, look what we built! It's got bridges and tunnels and everything! That's amazing, buddy. Ryan felt his throat tighten with emotion he couldn't quite name. Ready to go? Can we come back? Monica said they have movie afternoons sometimes. Yeah. Ryan glanced at Evelyn, who'd followed him to the lounge. Yeah, I think we can come back. In the elevator down, Jake chattered about all the games and activities, but Ryan barely heard him. His mind was spinning through everything that had changed in 24 hours. Yesterday morning, he'd been desperate. Yesterday afternoon, he'd been resigned to failure. Yesterday evening, he'd been stunned by an impossible opportunity. And now, standing in this elevator with his son and a folder full of papers that represented a completely different future, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. He felt like maybe they were going to be okay. Really, truly okay. Dad? Jake tugged on his sleeve. Where are we going? Ryan looked down at his son, at that gap-toothed smile and those eyes full of trust, and made a spontaneous decision. How would you like to go look at dogs? Jake's shriek of joy echoed through the entire lobby, earning them amused looks from the security guard and the Saturday staff. Ryan didn't care. Let them look. Let the whole world look. His son was happy, their future was suddenly bright with possibility, and for the first time since Sarah died, Ryan allowed himself to believe that making the right choice might actually lead somewhere good. They spent the afternoon at the animal shelter, where Jake fell in love with a scraggly terrier mix named Buster, who had one floppy ear and a tail that never stopped wagging. Ryan filled out the adoption application, and when the shelter worker called his references and did the background check, she smiled. "Everything looks good, Mr. Hale. You can take Buster home tomorrow after we complete the final medical check." Jake hugged the dog so tight Ryan was worried he'd squeeze him in half, and on the drive home, his son talked non-stop about all the things he and Buster were going to do together. Ryan listened, smiled, and felt the last knot of fear in his chest finally loosen. He'd made a choice in the rain. It had cost him everything he'd planned for, and somehow, impossibly, it had given him everything he'd never dared to hope for. Character, Evelyn had said. Character is what matters when everything else is stripped away. Ryan was starting to believe she might be right. Sunday evening found Ryan at his kitchen table surrounded by papers, a yellow highlighter, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The employment contract stared back at him with its dense paragraphs and legal terminology that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. Jake was asleep in the next room, exhausted from a day spent preparing for Buster's arrival, and the apartment was quiet except for the occasional sound of traffic from the street below. Ryan had read the contract 3 times already. Each time his eyes would catch on that salary figure, $135,000, and his brain would short-circuit trying to comprehend it. He'd called the lawyer Evelyn had recommended, a woman named Catherine Porter who'd spent 45 minutes on the phone walking him through every clause with the patience of someone who genuinely wanted him to understand what he was signing. "It's a solid offer," Catherine had concluded. "The non-compete is standard and reasonable. It basically says you can't immediately jump to a competitor and take proprietary information with you, which is fair. The confidentiality agreement is tight, but not unusual for this type of position. And the performance bonus structure is actually quite generous. Honestly, Mr. Hale, I've reviewed hundreds of employment contracts. This is one of the better ones I've seen." Ryan had thanked her, paid her consultation fee from his dwindling savings account, and still felt like he was missing something. Not in the contract itself, but in his own readiness. What if he'd gotten lucky on Friday? What if solving that logistics crisis had been a fluke and he couldn't replicate it? What if he showed up Monday morning and everyone realized they'd made a terrible mistake? His phone buzzed with a text, startling him from his spiral. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Marcus Chen. Evelyn gave me your number. Welcome to the team. Looking forward to working with you. P.S. Don't overthink it. You earned this." Ryan stared at the message, surprised by the gesture. Marcus had seemed skeptical of him on Friday, professional but clearly dubious about this warehouse worker who'd wandered into their crisis. The fact that he was reaching out now, on a Sunday night, with what felt like genuine encouragement, meant something. Ryan typed back, "Thanks. See you tomorrow." He set the phone down, looked at the contract one more time, and made his decision. He signed his name on the designated line, dated it, and put everything back in the folder. Done. No more second-guessing, no more spiraling. Tomorrow he'd start a new job, and he'd either succeed or fail on his own merits. Either way, Jake would have a dog, they'd have health insurance, and Ryan would have tried. That had to be enough. Monday morning arrived with cruel punctuality. Ryan woke at 5:30 out of habit, even though he didn't need to be at Crossline Systems until 9. He lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling and listening to Jake's soft breathing from across the room, and tried to quiet the anxiety thrumming through his veins. First day. New job. Everything riding on whether he could prove Friday wasn't just luck. He got up, showered, and stood in front of his closet staring at the limited options. His interview clothes were ruined. His work clothes were all warehouse appropriate. Jeans, t-shirts, sturdy boots. He had exactly one other dress shirt and one pair of khakis that weren't paint-stained or torn. It would have to do. Jake woke as Ryan was making breakfast, stumbling out of bed with his hair sticking up in every direction. "Is it today? Do we get Buster today?" This afternoon, Ryan confirmed, sliding scrambled eggs onto a plate. I'll pick him up after work and bring him home. You'll be at Tommy's house until then, remember? I remember. I'm going to tell Buster all about you so he's not scared when you come get him. Ryan smiled despite his nerves. That's a good plan, buddy. They ate breakfast together, and Ryan tried to focus on Jake's excited chatter about Buster rather than the weight of the day ahead. Linda picked Jake up at 8, giving Ryan an encouraging smile as she ushered his son into her car. Good luck today, she called through the window. You're going to be great. Ryan appreciated the confidence even if he didn't share it. He climbed into his truck, started the engine on the third try, and began the drive to his new life. The Crossline Systems parking lot was fuller on Monday morning than it had been on Saturday. Ryan found a spot near the back, between a Tesla and a BMW, and his battered truck looked like it was apologizing for existing. He grabbed the folder with his signed contract and forced himself to walk toward the building with something approaching confidence. The lobby was bustling with people in professional attire, all of them moving with purpose and direction. Ryan approached the reception desk, and a different person than Friday's receptionist looked up with a polite smile. Ryan Hale, he said. I'm starting today. Crisis management. She typed something into her computer. Ah, yes, Mr. Hale. Mrs. Cross left instructions. Take the elevator to 7, and Marcus Chen will meet you there. Ryan thanked her and joined the small crowd waiting for the elevator. Nobody spoke to him, too absorbed in their phones or their own thoughts, and Ryan felt acutely aware of how out of place he looked. These people belonged here. He was still trying to convince himself he wasn't an imposter. The elevator opened on the 7th floor, and Marcus was indeed waiting. He looked less stressed than he had on Friday, dressed in a crisp shirt and tie, and he extended his hand to Ryan with what seemed like genuine welcome. Ryan, good to see you. Come with me. We'll get you set up. Marcus led him through a maze of corridors past glass-walled offices and open workspace areas where people clustered around computers and whiteboards. Everyone looked busy, competent, like they knew exactly what they were doing. Ryan's anxiety notched up another level. They arrived at a small office near the end of a hallway. It wasn't huge, but it had a window, a desk with a new computer setup, and a door that actually closed. Ryan had never had an office with a door before. This is yours, Marcus said, gesturing around the space. Computer's already set up with your credentials. Patricia will be by shortly to walk you through our systems in more detail. For now, let's handle the administrative items. They spent the next 30 minutes on paperwork, tax forms, direct deposit information, benefits enrollment, security badge creation. Ryan's head spun with information about health insurance options and 401k contribution percentages, but he dutifully filled out forms and tried to look like he understood everything. The orientation packet covers most of the corporate policies, Marcus said, handing Ryan a thick binder. But honestly, the most important thing for your role is understanding that we don't operate on typical timelines. When a crisis hits, everything else stops. You might work 14-hour days for a week, then have relatively quiet periods where you're analyzing systems and looking for potential problems before they become actual problems. I can handle that, Ryan said, hoping it was true. I believe you can. Friday you demonstrated something we desperately need more of around here. The ability to cut through noise and find signal. Most of our people are brilliant, but they're so deep in the complexity of our systems that they sometimes can't see simple solutions. Marcus pulled up a chair and sat down, his expression turning more serious. I'll be honest with you, Ryan. When Evelyn brought you into that war room, I thought she'd lost her mind. I've been with this company for 12 years. I have 2 master's degrees, and I've run operations across 4 continents. And this person who looked like he'd just swum through a hurricane was about to tell me how to solve a problem I'd been working on for 8 hours. Ryan wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he just listened. But you did solve it. Not because you knew more than me or my team, but because you weren't trapped in our assumptions. You looked at what we had versus what we needed and found the shortest path between them. Marcus leaned forward. That's what this role is about. Not being the smartest person in the room, but being the person who asks the questions nobody else is asking. What if I ask the wrong questions? Then we'll figure that out and adjust. Look, Ryan, I'm not going to pretend this isn't going to be challenging. You're entering a world that operates by different rules than what you're used to. The politics, the personalities, the pressure, it's intense. But Evelyn doesn't make hiring decisions lightly, and if she thinks you're right for this, then I'm willing to trust her judgment. He stood, extending his hand again. Welcome to the team. Let's see what you can do. They shook hands, and Marcus left Ryan alone in his new office. Ryan sat in the chair behind his desk, and looked around at the space that was apparently his now. Computer, phone, office supplies in the drawer. A window overlooking the parking lot where his truck sat like a rust bucket among thoroughbreds. He'd made it. He was here. Now, he just had to prove he deserved to stay. The morning passed in a blur of system orientations and introductions. Patricia stopped by to walk him through Crossline's operational dashboards, showing him how to monitor logistics networks, inventory flows, and supply chain metrics in real time. It was overwhelming, but Ryan took notes and asked questions and tried to absorb as much as he could. You'll get used to it, Patricia assured him when she saw his slightly glazed expression. It looks like chaos now, but patterns emerge once you spend enough time with the data. Around noon, just as Ryan was contemplating finding a cafeteria or vending machine, his office phone rang. He stared at it for a second. He had a phone, a direct line, that was still weird, then answered it. Ryan Hale. Ryan, it's Evelyn. Can you come up to my office? We have a situation. His stomach dropped. Now? Now would be good, yes. Ryan hung up and stood, straightening his shirt reflexively. A situation. On his first day. This was either a test or terrible timing, and he wasn't sure which would be worse. The elevator ride to the 8th floor felt like it took hours. When he arrived, Evelyn's assistant waved him through immediately, and Ryan found himself back in that impressive office with the city view. But this time, Evelyn wasn't alone. 3 other people were clustered around her desk, all of them looking stressed, and a large monitor on the wall displayed what looked like financial projections in alarming shades of red. Ryan, good, Evelyn said without preamble. We have a client situation that's escalating rapidly. Kevin, brief him. One of the men, tall and thin, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, turned to Ryan. We have a major client, Riverside Manufacturing, threatening to terminate their contract because of repeated delivery delays. They represent $8 million annually in revenue. We've been having ongoing issues with their distribution routes for the past 3 months, and their CEO just called to say, unless we fix it immediately, they're moving to a competitor. What's causing the delays? Ryan asked. We don't know. That's the problem. Kevin pulled up a new screen showing delivery data. On paper, everything should be working. The routes are optimized, the schedules are accurate, the inventory is available, but somehow deliveries keep arriving late. Sometimes by hours, sometimes by days. There's no pattern we can identify. Have you talked to the drivers? Kevin blinked. The drivers? The actual people driving the trucks. Have you asked them what's happening on the ground? The 3 people exchanged glances, and Ryan could see the answer was no. They'd been analyzing data, running reports, checking systems, but they hadn't talked to the humans actually executing the deliveries. I'll take that as a no, Ryan said. Can someone get me contact information for the drivers who've been running the Riverside routes? All of them, for the past 3 months. Kevin looked at Evelyn, who nodded. Do it. Ryan, you have until end of business today to figure this out. Riverside's CEO wants a solution, not excuses, and she's made it clear this is our last chance. No pressure then. Ryan's first real assignment, and he had 8 hours to save an $8 million contract by solving a problem that had apparently stumped everyone else for 3 months. He went back to his office, and 15 minutes later, Kevin emailed him a list of driver names and phone numbers. Ryan stared at the list, 12 drivers total, and decided to start calling. The first 3 drivers he reached were professional but guarded. Yes, they'd had delays. No, they didn't know why. The routes were fine, the trucks were fine, everything was fine. Ryan could hear the careful neutrality in their voices, the way people talked when they didn't want to say something that might get them in trouble. The 4th driver, a man named Tom Reeves, who'd been with the company for 15 years, was slightly more forthcoming. Look, I don't want to cause problems, Tom said when Ryan pressed for details. But if you're asking why deliveries are late, I can tell you it's not the routes. What is it? It's the facility, the Riverside Distribution Center. We're supposed to arrive in a specific loading window, but half the time their docks are backed up and we're sitting in the parking lot for 2-3 hours waiting for a spot. By the time we actually get unloaded, we've blown our delivery schedule for the rest of the day. Ryan sat up straighter. Why are the docks backed up? No idea. Not my facility, not my problem. I just know I show up on time and end up waiting. And then I get flagged for late deliveries on routes that I can't complete because I lost 3 hours sitting in a parking lot. Does this happen every time? Maybe 70% of deliveries? It's bad enough that some of the other drivers have started joking about bringing sleeping bags. Ryan thanked Tom and immediately called the next driver on his list. Same story. And the next one. And the next. A pattern was emerging clear as day, and it had nothing to do with Crossline's operations. The problem wasn't their delivery system. The problem was Riverside's receiving system. Ryan spent the next hour gathering more details, talking to every driver who'd worked the Riverside routes. By 3 o'clock, he had enough information to be certain. He compiled his findings into a brief report and headed back up to Evelyn's office. She was on a phone call when he arrived, but she waved him in and ended the conversation quickly. Tell me you have something. I do. The delays aren't our fault. They're Riverside's. Evelyn's eyebrows rose. Explain. Ryan walked her through what he'd learned from the drivers, the consistent pattern of dock congestion, the hours spent waiting to unload, the ripple effect on subsequent deliveries. We're showing up on time. Their facility can't handle the volume efficiently. Our drivers are getting blamed for delays that Riverside's own operational inefficiencies are causing. That's a serious accusation to make to a major client. It's not an accusation, it's data. Ryan pulled up his notes on his phone. 12 drivers, 3 months of deliveries, consistent reports of the same issue. Either they're all lying, which seems unlikely, or Riverside has a bottleneck in their receiving process that they're not aware of. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number. Carol? It's Evelyn Cross. We need to talk about your distribution center operations. She paused, listening. No, I'm not making excuses. I'm sharing information that I believe you'll want to hear. Can we arrange a video call in the next hour? I'd like to show you what we've discovered. 30 minutes later, Ryan found himself in a conference room with Evelyn, Marcus, Kevin, and a large monitor displaying the very unhappy face of Carol Henderson, CEO of Riverside Manufacturing. She looked like someone who'd been dealing with incompetence all day and had no patience left for more of it. Mrs. Cross, I've given your company 3 months to fix this problem, Carol said, her voice tight. I'm not interested in more excuses or promises. I need solutions. I understand completely, Evelyn said calmly, and I believe we have one. But first, I need you to look at some data we've compiled. Ryan, walk Mrs. Henderson through what you found. Ryan's mouth went dry. He was about to tell a CEO of a major manufacturing company that her operation was the problem, not theirs. This could go very badly, very quickly, but he'd come this far. Might as well commit. Mrs. Henderson, we've conducted extensive interviews with our drivers who service your facility, Ryan began, pulling up his compiled data on the shared screen. What we've found is a consistent pattern of delays that originate not during transport, but during the receiving process at your distribution center. Carol's expression darkened. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that our drivers are arriving on schedule, but experiencing significant wait times, averaging 2 to 3 hours due to dock congestion at your facility. This creates a cascade effect where subsequent deliveries on their routes are delayed through no fault of our logistics planning. That's ridiculous. Our receiving operations are... May I show you something? Ryan interrupted gently. He pulled up a timeline he'd created showing arrival times versus actual unloading times for the past month. These are our GPS logs showing when our trucks arrive at your facility, cross-referenced with the times they actually begin unloading. You'll notice the gap. Sometimes it's 30 minutes, which is reasonable, but often it's 2 hours or more. Carol leaned closer to her screen, studying the data. Her expression shifted from angry to confused to something that might have been reluctant realization. We show our trucks leaving on schedule, Ryan continued. They arrive at your facility on schedule. But they're being delayed during receiving, which makes them late for everything else that day. The problem isn't our delivery system, Mrs. Henderson. It's the interface between our delivery system and your receiving system. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Ryan could feel Evelyn's eyes on him, Marcus's tension, Kevin's barely concealed anxiety. He just told a major client that they were blaming Crossline for problems they themselves were causing. This would either save the contract or destroy it. Finally, Carol spoke, and her voice was carefully controlled. Why wasn't I made aware of this 3 months ago? Because we didn't know, Evelyn said honestly. We were looking at system data, route optimization, scheduling algorithms. We weren't talking to the drivers actually making the deliveries. That's on us. We should have investigated more thoroughly from the beginning. But now that we have the information, Ryan added, we can work together to solve it. If you can address the dock congestion, maybe adding receiving capacity or adjusting scheduling windows, our deliveries will consistently meet their targets. This isn't about blame. It's about identifying the real bottleneck so we can fix it. Carol was quiet again, and Ryan held his breath. Then she sighed, and some of the anger drained from her face. I'm going to need to review our distribution center operations, she said. And I'm not happy that it took your company 3 months and a termination threat to figure this out. But she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. I appreciate the honesty. Most vendors would have kept making excuses rather than show me data that makes me look bad. We're not trying to make you look bad, Evelyn said. We're trying to solve the problem. Can we keep working together while you address the receiving capacity issue? Give me 2 weeks to audit our operations and make necessary changes. If your drivers still experience delays after that, we'll know the problem is on your end. Fair? More than fair, Evelyn agreed. They ended the call, and the conference room fell silent. Kevin looked stunned. Marcus looked impressed. Evelyn looked satisfied. That, Marcus said finally, was either brilliant or insane, possibly both. It was honest, Evelyn corrected, and it may have just saved an $8 million contract. Ryan, well done. Ryan felt the adrenaline starting to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I just asked the obvious question. Why wasn't anyone talking to the drivers? Because in corporate America, we have a bad habit of trusting data over people, Marcus said. We assume if the system says something should work, then any failure must be somewhere else. You didn't make that assumption. I spent 6 years working in a warehouse where management made decisions based on reports while ignoring what workers on the floor were saying, Ryan said. I learned pretty quickly that the people actually doing the work usually know where the problems are. Evelyn smiled. That perspective is exactly why you're here. Kevin, follow up with Riverside in 2 weeks. If their dock situation improves and our deliveries normalize, we'll have a good case study for how operational collaboration solves problems better than finger pointing. If it doesn't improve, we'll reassess. Ryan, go home. You've done enough for your first day. Ryan glanced at the clock. It was only 4:30, and he was technically supposed to work until 6. Are you sure? You solved a 3-month problem in about 5 hours. I think you've earned an early exit. Ryan didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his things from his office, said goodbye to Patricia, who was still at her desk, and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, he leaned against the wall and let himself feel the full impact of what had just happened. First day. First real test. And he'd passed. More than passed. He'd proven that Friday wasn't a fluke, that he could do this job, handle the pressure, find solutions that other people missed. The imposter syndrome that had been gnawing at him since Saturday started to quiet, replaced by something that felt like earned confidence. His phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Jake is bouncing off the walls waiting for Buster. You picking him up soon? Ryan smiled. Right, the dog. In the chaos of the day, he'd almost forgotten they were adding a 4-legged member to their family tonight. He drove to the animal shelter, signed the final paperwork, and loaded a very excited Buster into the truck. The dog immediately tried to climb into Ryan's lap, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. Ryan laughed, scratched behind the scraggly terrier's ears, and pointed the truck toward Linda's house. When he pulled up, Jake burst out the front door before Ryan had even fully parked. The boy's face when he saw Buster in the truck was pure, undiluted joy, the kind of expression that made every struggle worthwhile. Buster! Jake yanked open the truck door, and the dog launched himself at the boy, covering his face in enthusiastic licks. Jake dissolved into giggles, hugging the dog tight, and Ryan felt something in his chest expand and warm. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," Jake said, looking up at Ryan with eyes shining. "This is the best day ever." Ryan crouched down to his son's level, one hand on Jake's shoulder and one on Buster's head. "You're welcome, buddy. But remember, taking care of a dog is a big responsibility. That means feeding him, walking him, cleaning up after him." I know. I'll do everything, I promise." Jake's words tumbled over each other in his excitement. "Can we go home? I want to show him his new home." They loaded into the truck, Buster between them on the bench seat, and drove back to their apartment. It felt different somehow, pulling into that familiar parking lot with the dog panting happily and Jake chattering about all the things he and Buster were going to do together. Like maybe this cramped apartment in this rundown building wasn't going to be home for much longer. Like their life was expanding in ways Ryan hadn't dared to imagine just days ago. That night, after Jake finally fell asleep with Buster curled up at the foot of his bed, Ryan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He'd been drafting an email to his warehouse supervisor, giving his 2 weeks' notice. It should have been easy. He was moving to something better, something that paid 3 times as much and offered a future instead of just survival. But the words stuck in his throat. Not because he wanted to stay at the warehouse. He absolutely didn't. But because leaving felt like closing a door on the person he'd been. The struggling single father who worked overtime to keep the lights on. The guy who couldn't afford new shoes for his kid. The man who'd been invisible in a society that measured worth by income. That person had made the choice in the rain. That person had stopped to help when it would have been easier to keep driving. And maybe, Ryan thought, he needed to honor that person even as he became someone new. He finished the email, read it over once, and hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he closed the laptop, checked one more time that Jake and Buster were sleeping peacefully, and let himself feel the full weight of gratitude for how improbably right things had turned out. Tomorrow, he'd go back to Crossline Systems and continue proving he belonged there. He'd face new challenges, make mistakes, learn from people smarter than him, and hopefully keep finding solutions that others overlooked. But tonight, in this moment, Ryan Hale allowed himself to simply be grateful for second chances. For people like Evelyn Cross who saw potential where others saw only appearances. For sons who believed in their fathers unconditionally. And for scraggly terrier mixes who completed families that hadn't even known they were incomplete. The rain had washed away his old life, but it had also revealed a path forward he never could have found on his own. And as Ryan finally headed to bed, exhausted but content, he realized that sometimes the most important choice wasn't about what you gained. It was about who you proved yourself to be when everything was on the line. 3 weeks passed in a blur of challenges, solutions, and gradual integration into a world Ryan had never imagined belonging to. He settled into a rhythm at Crossline Systems, early mornings reviewing operational reports, days spent diving into problems that ranged from supply chain disruptions to personnel conflicts, evenings with Jake and Buster in their apartment that suddenly felt too small for the life they were building. The Riverside situation had resolved exactly as Ryan predicted. Carol Henderson's audit revealed significant bottlenecks in their receiving operations, and after reorganizing their dock schedules and adding capacity, delivery times normalized. She'd even called Evelyn personally to thank them for the honesty, and the contract was renewed for another 3 years. Ryan's first major save was now a case study that Marcus referenced in training sessions. But success brought its own pressures. Each solved problem raised expectations for the next one. Each time Ryan proved himself, the stakes got higher. And while his colleagues had moved from skepticism to respect, Ryan still felt the weight of being the outsider, the guy without the degrees or the pedigree, constantly having to demonstrate he belonged. It was Friday afternoon when everything came to a head. Ryan was in his office reviewing logistics data for a West Coast distribution network when his phone rang. Evelyn's name flashed on the screen. "Ryan, conference room 3. Now, we have a situation." The word situation had become a familiar trigger, launching Ryan's mind into problem-solving mode before he even knew the details. He grabbed his tablet and headed down the hall, finding the conference room already packed with senior leadership. Evelyn stood at the head of the table, her expression grim. Marcus was there, along with Patricia, Kevin, and several other executives Ryan recognized but didn't know well. "Sit," Evelyn directed, and Ryan took an empty chair near the middle of the table. We have approximately 4 hours to solve what might be the biggest crisis this company has faced in 5 years. She pulled up a presentation on the main screen. Summit Technologies has offered us a contract worth $42 million over 2 years. It would be our largest client by a significant margin. The catch is, they need a proposal demonstrating we can handle their volume and complexity by end of business today. If we can't deliver, they're going with our primary competitor. 4 hours? Someone said. That's impossible. A proposal like that normally takes weeks. Which is why Summit is using it as a stress test, Evelyn said coolly. They want to see how we perform under extreme pressure because their business operates under extreme pressure. If we can't produce a credible proposal in 4 hours, they don't trust us to handle their ongoing operations. Marcus pulled up additional screens showing Summit's requirements. A tech company with offices in 15 cities, complex just-in-time delivery needs, integration with multiple supply chains, and service-level agreements that bordered on unrealistic. It was massive, complicated, and frankly terrifying. We need a miracle, Patricia said, and nobody disagreed. Evelyn's eyes found Ryan across the table. Or we need someone who specializes in finding solutions everyone else thinks are impossible. Ryan, thoughts? Every head turned toward him. Ryan felt the familiar surge of pressure mixed with adrenaline, the sensation he was starting to recognize as his normal state at this company. He studied the requirements on the screen, his mind automatically sorting information into patterns. We can't build a comprehensive proposal from scratch in 4 hours, he said, but we don't need to. We need to show we understand their problems and have a viable framework for solving them. That's semantics, someone muttered. No, it's strategy, Ryan countered. Summit doesn't actually expect a perfect proposal in 4 hours. That's not realistic, and they know it. What they're testing is whether we can quickly assess their needs, identify the critical challenges, and demonstrate a credible approach. They want to see our thinking, not our final product. Evelyn leaned forward. Keep going. Break this down into components. Summit has 3 primary operational challenges based on these requirements. Ryan stood, moving to the screen to point at specific sections. First, geographic distribution across 15 cities with varying volumes. Second, just-in-time delivery, which means zero tolerance for delays. Third, integration with their existing supply chain partners without disrupting current operations. He turned back to the room. We don't need to solve all 3 perfectly. We need to show we understand all 3 and have concrete approaches for each. Marcus, your team has done multi-city distribution for clients before, right? Yes, but nothing at this scale. Doesn't matter. The principles are the same, just multiplied. Pull examples from our 3 largest multi-city clients. Show the framework we used, the success metrics we achieved, and how we'd scale that for Summit's needs. That's component 1. Ryan pointed to Patricia. Just-in-time delivery is about redundancy and real-time monitoring. We already have those capabilities, we just haven't marketed them as a specific service. Can you compile our response time data from the past year? Show instances where we've recovered from potential delays and maintained delivery windows. Patricia nodded, already making notes. Kevin, the supply chain integration piece is about communication protocols and data sharing. We don't need to know every detail of Summit's partners. We need to show we have experience integrating with diverse systems and can adapt our processes to work within complex networks. Pull case studies where we've done that successfully. Ryan looked around the room at faces that had shifted from skeptical to thoughtful. We're not building a proposal from zero. We're assembling evidence that we can handle what Summit is asking. It's not about perfection, it's about credibility. Can we demonstrate we understand their challenges and have proven capabilities that address them? Yes. Can we do it in 4 hours? If we divide the work and execute fast, absolutely. The room was silent for a beat, then Evelyn smiled. You heard him, Marcus. Take geographic distribution. Patricia, delivery reliability. Kevin, integration case studies. I want draft sections in 2 hours so we have time to compile and refine. Ryan, you're coordinating. Make sure all the pieces fit together into something coherent. Go. The room exploded into motion. People grabbed laptops and tablets, formed into smaller working groups, started pulling data and making calls. Ryan found himself at the center of controlled chaos, fielding questions, making decisions, keeping everyone aligned on the overall strategy while they executed their individual pieces. The first hour was pure intensity. Marcus's team compiled geographic data and created distribution models. Patricia pulled performance metrics and built visualizations showing reliability trends. Kevin contacted former clients for permission to reference their integrations as case studies. Ryan moved between groups, ensuring consistency in messaging and approach. The second hour was refinement. Draft sections started coming together and Ryan reviewed each one, suggesting adjustments to emphasize credibility over comprehensiveness. They weren't trying to prove they were perfect, they were trying to prove they were capable and honest about their strengths. This section on delivery guarantees is too aggressive, Ryan told Patricia, pointing at a claim promising 99.9% on-time delivery. We can't actually guarantee that at Summit's scale. Change it to targeting 99% with transparent reporting and rapid recovery protocols. That's more honest and actually more impressive because it shows we understand the challenges. Patricia adjusted the language, and Ryan moved on to Marcus's geographic analysis. Good framework, but add a section acknowledging the scaling challenges. Summit will respect us more if we're upfront about what we'll need to implement to handle their volume. Suggest a phased rollout plan rather than claiming we can handle everything immediately. Marcus incorporated the feedback, and slowly, piece by piece, the proposal took shape. It wasn't elegant or polished, but it was substantive and credible. It showed understanding of Summit's needs and honest assessment of how Crossline could meet them. With 40 minutes remaining, Ryan compiled all the sections into a single document. He read through it once, made final adjustments to ensure the tone was consistent, and added an executive summary that framed their entire approach. We're not claiming to be perfect, he wrote. We're demonstrating that we understand complexity, we have proven frameworks for handling it, and we're honest about both our capabilities and our limitations. Summit's business demands a partner who can think clearly under pressure and execute reliably under impossible timelines. This proposal itself is evidence that we're that partner. He sent the compiled document to Evelyn's computer with 15 minutes to spare. She read through it in silence while the team waited, tension thick enough to cut. Finally, she looked up. This is good. Really good. It's not what I expected when I called this meeting, but it's exactly what Summit needs to see. She turned to Ryan. How confident are you in this approach? Very, Ryan said without hesitation. Because it's true. Every claim we make is backed by actual evidence. Every challenge we acknowledge is real. If Summit wants smoke and mirrors, they should go with our competitor. If they want a partner who can actually deliver, this shows we're that partner. Evelyn nodded and forwarded the document to Summit's CEO with 5 minutes remaining on the deadline. Then she stood, addressing the room. Regardless of what happens with Summit, what you all accomplished in the last 4 hours was exceptional. That's the kind of performance that builds great companies. Thank you. The team dispersed, exhausted but energized by what they'd pulled off. Ryan returned to his office and collapsed into his chair, feeling the adrenaline crash that always followed intense problem-solving sessions. His phone showed 3 missed texts from Linda asking about pickup time for Jake. He'd completely lost track of normal life during the crisis sprint. He was responding when Marcus appeared in his doorway. You have a minute? Sure. Ryan gestured to the empty chair across from his desk. Marcus sat, and for a moment he just looked at Ryan with an expression that was hard to read. Then he said, When Evelyn first brought you in, I thought it was the worst hiring decision I'd ever seen. No offense. None taken. I've spent my entire career believing credentials mattered. Degrees, certifications, years of experience in the field. I built my identity around being the most qualified person in the room. Marcus paused. And then you show up, and you're not the most qualified, not even close. But somehow you keep solving problems faster and more effectively than people with twice your education. Ryan wasn't sure where this was going. I've been lucky. Right place, right time. No. Marcus shook his head firmly. It's not luck. It's perspective. You see things we miss because you're not trapped in our assumptions. You ask the questions we don't think to ask because they seem too simple or too obvious. And you have something that can't be taught in any graduate program. You understand that systems are made of people, and people don't always behave the way data says they should. I just try to look at what's actually happening instead of what's supposed to be happening. Exactly, and that's rare, especially at this level. Marcus stood. I wanted you to know that you've earned your place here. Not because Evelyn took a chance on you, but because you've proven yourself over and over. The team respects you, I respect you, and I'm glad you're here. He left before Ryan could formulate a response. Ryan sat in his office staring at the empty doorway and felt something shift inside him. He'd been operating for 3 weeks under the assumption that he was on probation, that he had to constantly prove he deserved to be here. But maybe that wasn't true anymore. Maybe he'd already proven it. The realization was both relieving and terrifying. If he truly belonged here, then the pressure wasn't temporary. This was his life now. The high stakes, the impossible deadlines, the constant demand to perform at levels he'd never imagined. Could he sustain this? Could he keep being the person who solved unsolvable problems while also being the father Jake needed? His phone rang, interrupting the spiral. Evelyn. Summit just called, she said, and Ryan couldn't read her tone. Can you come up? Ryan's stomach knotted as he took the elevator to the 8th floor. 4 hours wasn't much time to review a proposal, even a brief one. Either Summit had loved it enough to call immediately or hated it enough to reject it outright. He had no idea which was more likely. Evelyn's office door was open. She was standing at her window, looking out at the city, and she didn't turn when Ryan entered. Summit's CEO said, "Our proposal was the most honest pitch he's received in 20 years of business," Evelyn said quietly. He said most companies would have promised the moon and figured out later they couldn't deliver. We told him exactly what we could do, what we'd need to scale up to his requirements, and what challenges we foresaw. He appreciated that more than any amount of polish or salesmanship. Ryan waited, not daring to hope. Evelyn turned, and she was smiling. "We got the contract. $42 million over 2 years with option to extend. It's the biggest deal in Crossline's history." Relief and pride and disbelief washed over Ryan in equal measures. That's incredible. It's more than incredible. It's transformative for the company. And Ryan, it happened because you cut through the panic and showed us how to play to our actual strengths rather than trying to be something we're not. She moved to her desk, pulled out a folder. "Which brings me to something I've been considering." Ryan's heart rate picked up. Whatever was in that folder felt significant. "You've been here 3 weeks. In that time, you've saved an $8 million contract, solved problems that had been plaguing us for months, and just helped secure the largest deal in company history. That's not the performance of a crisis management specialist. That's the performance of someone who should be helping shape company strategy at the highest level." She held out the folder. "I'm promoting you to Director of Operational Strategy. Significant salary increase, expanded responsibilities, seat at the senior leadership table. You'll still handle crisis situations because that's where you excel, but you'll also be involved in long-term planning and strategic decision-making. Marcus has agreed to this enthusiastically, by the way. He suggested it before I did." Ryan took the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside was a new offer letter with a salary that made his previous impossible salary look modest. Director-level position. Benefits that included things like stock options that he barely understood but knew were valuable. A career trajectory that a month ago would have seemed like fantasy. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say yes, then go home to your son and celebrate. You've earned this 10 times over, Ryan. Stop questioning whether you belong here and start owning the fact that you do." Ryan looked at the offer letter, at the number that would mean Jake could have everything. Good schools, new clothes, the dog, the stability every child deserved. He thought about Sarah, about how she'd always believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself, about how she'd told him he had gifts he didn't recognize, potential he was too afraid to pursue. She'd been right, and it had taken a rainstorm, a stranded stranger, and a choice between self-interest and character to finally reveal it. "Yes," Ryan said. "I'll take it." Evelyn's smile widened. "Good. Now get out of here. It's Friday evening, and you have a family waiting for you." Ryan left her office, took the elevator down, and walked through the lobby in a daze. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold as he crossed the parking lot to his truck. The battered vehicle still looked out of place among the luxury cars, but somehow that mattered less now. Maybe he'd get a newer truck eventually, or maybe he'd keep this one as a reminder of where he'd come from. The drive home felt different than it had 3 weeks ago. The streets were the same, the buildings unchanged, but Ryan saw them through new eyes. He wasn't driving away from another day of survival. He was driving toward a future that had opened up in ways he never imagined possible. He picked up Jake from Linda's house, and his son bounced into the truck with Buster on a leash, chattering about their day at the park. Ryan listened and smiled and waited until they were home, sitting at their kitchen table with pizza he'd splurged on before sharing his news. "So, buddy, I got some good news today," Ryan started. "Remember how I told you about the big project at work?" Jake nodded, mouth full of pizza. "We won it. And because of that, my boss offered me an even better position. More money, more responsibility, which means..." Ryan took a breath. "Which means we can start looking for a new place to live, somewhere bigger, maybe with a yard for Buster." Jake's eyes went huge. "Really? Like a real house?" "Maybe not a house right away, but definitely a better apartment, with 2 bedrooms so you can have your own room, and a kitchen where the faucet doesn't leak." Jake launched himself at Ryan, nearly knocking over his pizza in the process. "That's awesome, Dad. Can my room have a window, and can Buster sleep in there with me?" "We'll find you the best room we can, I promise." Ryan hugged his son tight, feeling the weight of 3 years of struggle finally lifting. They'd been treading water for so long, just trying to keep their heads above the surface. Now, finally, they could swim toward shore. That night, after Jake fell asleep, Ryan sat on their apartment's small balcony, barely big enough for one folding chair, and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there was the road where he'd made the choice to stop, the spot where his old life ended and this impossible new one began. He thought about the man he'd been that day, desperate, afraid, running out of options and out of hope. That man had stopped to help anyway, had chosen character over convenience, had done the right thing even when it cost him everything he'd been working toward, and somehow, impossibly, it had led him here. To a career he never planned for, to stability he'd stopped believing was possible, to proof that sometimes the worst decisions turned out to be the best ones, and sometimes losing everything was the only way to find what you were really meant to have. His phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Summit CEO wants to meet the team that put together the proposal. Lunch next Tuesday. Bring your A game." Ryan smiled and typed back, "Will do." Another text came through, this one from Marcus. "Congratulations on the promotion. Well deserved. Looking forward to working with you as a peer." Ryan responded with thanks and set his phone down. A peer. Not a subordinate or a project, but a peer. Someone who belonged at that table, whose voice carried weight, whose judgment was trusted. It had taken 33 years, a tragedy, a rainstorm, and one moment of choosing right over easy. But Ryan Hale had finally found his place. He went back inside, checked on Jake one more time, his son sleeping peacefully with Buster curled against his side, and allowed himself to feel the full weight of gratitude for how far they'd come. The apartment was still too small, the furniture still worn, the appliances still unreliable. But none of that mattered anymore because it was temporary. They were on their way to something better. Ryan climbed into his own bed, still the couch that folded out, still uncomfortable, still too close to Jake's sleeping space. But he didn't mind. Soon enough, they'd have a real place with real rooms and real space to grow. Soon enough, all of this would be a memory of harder times they'd survived together. He closed his eyes and thought about the choice in the storm one last time, about the woman in the mud, the interview he'd missed, the moment when everything had seemed lost. He'd thought he was throwing away his future to help a stranger. He'd had no idea he was actually finding it. Character, Evelyn had said. Character is what matters when everything else is stripped away. She'd been right. But what she hadn't said, what Ryan was only now understanding, was that character didn't just matter in the moment of choice. It mattered in every moment that followed, in how you handled success as much as how you handled struggle, in whether you used opportunity to build something meaningful or just to make yourself comfortable. Ryan had a choice now, just like he'd had a choice in that rainstorm. He could take this new position, this new salary, this new life, and just enjoy the comfort of it. Or he could remember where he came from, remember all the people still stuck in the mud of their own struggles, and use his new position to make a difference. The answer was obvious. It had always been obvious. The same thing that made him stop in the rain would guide him now. 3 months later, Ryan stood in the living room of their new apartment, A spacious two-bedroom with actual rooms and working appliances and a small patio where Buster could play. Jake's bedroom had a window with a view of a park, and he decorated it with posters and the kind of personal touches that only come when a kid finally has space to claim as his own. They'd settled in quickly, though some days Ryan still woke up expecting to see the cramped studio apartment and had to remind himself this was real. The promotion had come with everything Evelyn promised and more. He sat in strategic planning meetings, contributed to company direction, handled crises when they arose, but also worked to prevent them before they became critical. And he'd started an initiative that was personal to him, a partnership program with local warehouses and logistics companies to identify talented workers who could transition into higher-level positions. People like he'd been, stuck in jobs below their potential because they lacked credentials or connections, or simply the knowledge that other opportunities existed. Marcus had supported the program enthusiastically. "You're right," he'd said when Ryan first proposed it. "We've been fishing in the same small pond of candidates for years. Time to expand our thinking about where talent comes from." The first 3 workers Ryan brought into the program were now in training positions, learning the systems and proving they had the same kind of practical intelligence that had served Ryan so well. One of them, a forklift driver named Carmen, who'd been working warehouses for 15 years, had already identified a safety issue that had been overlooked by engineers with fancy degrees. Jake thrived in their new life. New school, new friends, space to grow and be a kid without the constant weight of poverty pressing down. He joined a soccer team, was getting good grades, talked about maybe wanting to be a veterinarian when he grew up. And every night, without fail, he hugged Ryan tight and said, "Love you, Dad." Those 3 words made everything worth it. Every long day, every impossible problem, every moment of doubt about whether he could sustain this level of performance, all of it was worth it for Jake's stability and happiness. On a Friday evening in early fall, Ryan was leaving the office when he noticed a car stuck on the side of the road near the parking lot exit. Not in mud this time, but clearly having mechanical trouble, hazard lights blinking. A young woman stood beside it, phone pressed to her ear, looking frustrated and worried. Ryan slowed his truck, and for just a moment he was back in that rainstorm facing the same choice. Help or keep going, convenience or character. He pulled over. "Need help, Paul?" he called out, climbing from his truck. The woman looked up, relief crossing her face. "Car died. I've called a tow truck, but they said it'll be at least an hour. I'm supposed to pick up my daughter from daycare in 20 minutes, and they charge late fees I really can't afford right now." Ryan pulled out his phone. "Where's the daycare? I can give you a ride." "I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering." Ryan smiled. "Come on. We'll get you to your daughter, then you can deal with the car situation without the pressure of a deadline." The woman hesitated, clearly weighing stranger danger against desperate need, then nodded. "Thank you. Seriously. You have no idea how much this helps." They drove to the daycare, made it with 5 minutes to spare, and Ryan waited while she collected a little girl about 4 years old with pigtails and a backpack almost as big as she was. The relief on the mother's face when she wasn't charged late fees was profound and familiar. Ryan remembered that feeling, that constant calculus of small financial disasters that could cascade into bigger problems. "I don't know how to thank you," the woman said when he dropped them back at her car, where a tow truck had just arrived. "Just pass it forward," Ryan said. "Someday when you're in a position to help someone else, do it. That's thanks enough." He drove home to his apartment where Jake and Buster were waiting, where dinner would be whatever Jake wanted because they could afford options now, where the evening would be comfortable and peaceful and secure. And Ryan thought about how strange and wonderful it was that helping people had become the thing that defined both his lowest moment and his greatest success. The rainstorm had been 6 months ago. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime, and sometimes it felt like yesterday. But either way, Ryan knew that moment would always be the dividing line in his life. The before and after. The point where everything changed. He'd gone into that storm thinking he was sacrificing his future for a stranger. He'd come out of it with a future better than any he could have imagined. Not because the universe rewarded good deeds with fairy tale endings, but because the choice revealed something about who he was, and that revelation opened doors he hadn't known existed. Character. Evelyn had been right all along. It wasn't about credentials or connections or being in the right place at the right time. It was about who you chose to be when the choice was hard. when stopping cost you something, when doing right meant risking wrong. Ryan Hale had made that choice in the mud and rain, and it had changed everything. Not just for him, but for Jake, for the workers he was now helping, for the company that had learned to value perspective over pedigree. One choice, made in a moment of impossible pressure, had rippled out in ways he never could have predicted. And as he walked into his apartment where his son greeted him with a hug and a dog greeted him with enthusiasm, Ryan understood the most important truth of all. He hadn't lost his opportunity that day in the storm. He'd found it. The rain had washed away the life he'd been clinging to and revealed the life he was meant to live. And standing in his comfortable apartment with his happy son and their ridiculous dog, Ryan Hale finally allowed himself to believe he deserved all of it. Not because he'd gotten lucky, not because someone had taken pity on him, but because when it mattered most, when everything was on the line and the easy choice beckoned, he'd chosen character instead. And character, it turned out, was the foundation on which everything else worth having was built.